Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Broccoli Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Had Dark Matter Quirk. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Everyone wants to be a hero. Everyone wants power. But Izuku wanted to help people. He wanted to be a hero that people looked to and smiled because they knew they were safe even in the most dangerous of situations. To do that, however, he needed a flashy quirk, and at the tender age of 7 as he sat in his math class muttering to himself, he feared it would never happen. Doctors told him there was no reason he wouldn't develop a quirk, he just had to be patient. In the meantime, Izuku learned anything and everything about heroes. He analyzed everything heroes did from their fighting styles to their outfits, trying to learn the best way to become a hero. He even analyzed his best friend Kaken. Though sometimes he wondered if Kaken thought they were friends, because Kaken seemed to resent him for not having a quirk yet. He always called him helpless. But could he blame him? He was pretty hopeless, just a black abyss skiing up all the information and power he could in hopes that it'd be enough to get him there by sheer force of will. With that thought, the room around him seemed to explode into darkness. Everything was painted with an inky black mess that swirled around the classroom. The only thing Izuku could make out were the screams of his classmates as everyone rushed to find the source of the sudden onslaught. His hands felt numb, like they were full of pins and needles. Panic rose in his throat as the static feeling traveled up his arms and spread further through his body. His throat hitched as he looked down to see the black inky stuff creeping further and further. The black nothingness that seemed to engulf everything around him was covering his skin. No, it was like he had become the black nothing, like he was this terrifying mess that he saw around him. His hands, which he could barely feel, began to shake, and he fell to the floor. He crawled to a corner of the room, ears pounding and everything staticky as the shouts grew louder in the room. He barely registered it when his classmates were rushed out of the room and terrified cries turned to the mutterings of adults and teachers. He could vaguely make out the familiar shouts of someone yelling that he needed help. It needed to stop. He couldn't feel his body anymore. What if it wouldn't go back and he was stuck like this forever? The adrenaline and questions rushing through his body suppressed how drained he really felt. The tendrils and masses of black nothing that seemed to originate from his body seemed to be skiing every ounce of energy from him until not only could he not feel anything, but he could barely keep himself conscious. Just as quickly as it had come on, the darkness retreated to his body and his limbs looked like new as he slumped over, completely passed out. He wasn't awake to hear the sighs of relief from confused and scared teachers as the episode ended. The room was a mess. Izuku was completely drained of any energy, and the students were probably traumatized, but at least it was over. He had a quirk after all. It was 3 days before Izuku was ready to return to school. After waking up, his mom had taken him to register his quirk, which was exhausting in itself. Abyss, the ability to manipulate dark matter and dark energy. Wasn't that something? Izuku finally returned to classes on a Friday. The moment he set foot in the classroom, he was bombarded. "Izuku!" Kaken yelled when he spotted the greenette. "How long have you been hiding a quirk like that? You nearly destroyed the whole classroom." "I wasn't hiding anything," he squeaked back. "That was the first time that happened. You could have hurt someone or yourself. You really are helpless." Kaken shouted, his fists clenched. "That was so cool. Can you turn all black like you did before again? Or make those big tentacle things again?" An overenthusiastic boy cried. "OMG, make the lights go out," a girl added. The crowd of curious kids grew ever larger as everyone requested he recreate that day. However, truth be told, he hadn't even attempted to produce any more of what he now knew to be dark matter. "It shouldn't be difficult though. I guess I can try, but it makes me super tired," Izuku trailed off. "Oh come on, don't be a baby," another boy shouted. Kaken looked on with interest and perhaps a bit of apprehension. "Okay," he replied. He didn't know where to start, so he just held his hands up and tried to focus on creating a little bit of dark matter. After a minute of held breaths and staring at Izuku's palms, a few kids trailed away muttering about how lame this was. "You seriously can't even do it a little?" A boy near Izuku scoffed. I could control my quirk as soon as I got it. Imagine being so lame that you nearly blow up the classroom and then you can't ever do it again. A girl said to her friend, makes having such a powerful quirk useless. What a waste. It's no wonder Izuku's so weak he would never be able to control a quirk like that. Really, you'd think he could at least try. The insults piled on as he scrambled for his seat, mortified. The rest of the day was more of the same. A few kids approached him at recess and the same thing happened. Izuku truly couldn't create any more dark matter, and trying just exhausted him. In the weeks following, the kids just continued to tease him about his abilities. Eventually someone pointed out how his quirk was more of a villain's quirk, and that's when it got so much worse. Kids started blowing the day when his quirk manifested way out of proportion. They made it seem like he'd done it on purpose, and they began tormenting him for it. They called him a villain, weak, evil, and so much worse. Sometimes they would destroy his things or shove him down. When they played heroes and villains at recess, they would all gang up on him and beat him up pretending to save the day. That's how the years progressed. By the time they'd reached the next school year, Izuku was actually able to produce a bit of dark matter, but not much at all. It just fueled the fire for the bullying. They saw how his quirk actually worked, and it was like they feared him. They tore him down every time he tried to use his quirk until he was scared to do it in public. They made fun of him for being weak and helpless. Sometimes Kaken would join in, especially if it was about Izuku being weak, but he tended not to bring up Izuku's quirk. It was awful, but Izuku persevered. He was going to be a hero and prove all of them wrong. He didn't even need a villain's quirk to do it, but he was going to learn to control it. Anyway, he wouldn't let anything hold him back. Katsuki remembered the day Izuku's quirk manifested. The other boy had been muttering to himself about being a hero just like he always did, but all of a sudden it was like the lights went out. A few girls screamed because that's what girls do, and a few kids started yelling trying to figure out what happened. Black tendrils of, well, nothing started covering the room and students jumped from their seats. Panic ensued. He remembered looking behind him at Izuku and seeing the fear in his eyes as the black material crept over his skin. Was this a villain attack? Some sick prank? Others started noticing where the stuff seemed to be coming from too, and it just made it worse. Nobody knew what was happening. Desks were overturned, papers were flying, kids were being pushed around by the tendrils and masses of blackness. But Izuku didn't even seem to notice. The look on his face was terrifying. Fear and confusion was painted across his features, and his eyes welled with tears. His hands were shaking and he collapsed to the floor, trying to get away from everything around him. Teachers started forcing everyone into the hallway and discussing how to get Izuku under control. "We need to contain him now," their homeroom teacher noted with a glare. "He's trashing my classroom. Maybe we could knock him out somehow? Or get his mom up here?" Another responded. They continued thinking of ways to capture or sedate Izuku until Katsuki had had enough. "He needs help. Are you all idiots or something?" he shouted. "Quit talking about how to catch him, and help him for Christ's sake. I thought you cared about students." Rage bubbled in his stomach and his palms popped with tiny explosions. As quick and devastating as the incident had begun, it ended. The tendrils of black matter receded to Izuku's body, and his skin returned to normal, but he was out cold. Katsuki was confused, his stomach churned and his heart was racing, but he was furious. His palms wouldn't stop crackling, and his muscles were tensed. Was he scared? Why was he so shaken? Everybody gets quirks. Izuku had so much overwhelming power. How did someone like him get such a quirk? Had he been wrong about Izuku? Was he really going to be a hero? What if he was even stronger than himself? No, he couldn't be. When Izuku finally came back to school, he looked awful. He was barely on his feet, but none of the rest of the class seemed to care. After Katsuki reprimanded him a bit, the other students took over, begging to see his quirk again. It seemed Katsuki had nothing to worry about after all because Izuku couldn't even use his quirk anymore. Despite that, something in him had flipped. Maybe the green-haired pipsqueak wasn't so useless after all. If he could figure out how to control that quirk of his, maybe they could both be great? Katsuki tried to be tolerable, he really did, but most people just set him off. Especially Deku, as he had been dubbed by the time they hit 4th grade. He had so much potential but wasted it, and it set Katsuki off to no end. Why did the powers that be give him such a great quirk but then not make him strong enough to control it? It was so stupid. And his classmates were even dumber. Sure, Izuku was weak and probably had no future as a hero if he didn't buckle down and start trying, but they took it too far. He wasn't a villain. Didn't they remember the fear in his eyes when his quirk went off? Assholes. They just wanted a punching bag, but at least Katsuki had a bit more dignity. That became overwhelmingly apparent when they turned on him. Nothing had even happened that day to set off the reckless kids in his class, but maybe that's why it happened in the first place. They got bored. Deku quit fighting back, and they decided to poke the bear. Katsuki was known for his quick temper and sharp tongue, but he never really engaged people in fights, and after a while this led to a few kids questioning how tough he really was. "Hey Bakugu," one of the nobodies in his class sneered, "how come you're all bark and no bite? Are you just as weak as stupid Deku?" "Yeah, why don't you ever throw a punch, huh? What are you, scared or some sheet? Are you a PP or something? Deku can't hurt ya," another added. "You talk a pretty big game and you've got that flashy quirk, but you're pretty much as harmless as a baby." "Wah baby," the first boy chimed in. A few kids had begun to notice the scene and began snickering and whispering to themselves. "F off extra," Katsuki hissed, his palms smoldering where he clenched them on the desk. "I'm nothing like Deku and you know it. I'm gonna be a hero." "Oh, how much you wanna bet you're actually working with that green-haired wimp? Your quirk is just as villainous, you know," another boy muttered. "He totally has a point. Bakugu's probably worse than Deku. I bet his parents hate him or something, that's why he's so mean but scared to actually do anything," some girl said to her friend loudly enough that everyone could hear. I said, "Off. Do you want to get exploded into next week?" Bakugu shouted, raising a crackling palm. Was this what it was like being Izuku all day? "Leave him alone." Did you say? "Wanna speak up, pipsqueak?" the initial boy growled as he turned on whoever had made the comment. Izuku rose from his desk, clenched fists shaking. He whirled on the boys and shoved the first one back from Katsuki's desk. "I said leave him alone. He's not even doing anything, Zerke." "Oh, the villain reveals his true colors," the boy exclaimed with a laugh. He leaned into Izuku's ear and whispered, "Why don't you shut the F up and wait your turn, weakling?" With that, Izuku snapped. A tendril of dark matter shot from behind him and wrapped around the boy's throat, suspending him a few inches off the ground. He clawed at black mass and gasped for air. His legs dangled as he tried to pull himself free to no avail. Izuku held him up, leaned in close, and whispered, "I am not weak. Neither is Kaken, so shut." The boy fell to the ground, his face red as a beet and tears pouring down his cheeks. The entire class sat stunned in silence. The boys scrambled to escape and find a teacher, while the rest of the room busied themselves with pretending to do classwork as whispers and hushed conversations broke out. Izuku leaned on Katsuki's desk for a moment before falling back into his seat and burying his head in his arms. Katsuki couldn't tell if he was crying or just worn out, but either way he wasn't having it. Did you do that?" "I could have handled it on my own," he snarled. Izuku slowly raised his head and glared at the angry blonde. "You don't deserve to be bullied." "It is, and I'm not letting anyone else go through it," he answered. "Why the hell wouldn't you just stick up for yourself if you can do that? Are you actually stupid or something?" he asked, furious. "What's the point in giving them what they want? They say all I'll be is a villain, but I'm not. Neither are you, so would you quit talking like one?" he snapped before dropping his head back down in exhaustion. Katsuki stared at the boy he'd known all his life and realized he was never going to live this down. A weak nobody like Izuku saved his butt from entitled assholes. He'd just have to make him realize he could do that and more. Nobody was surpassing him. Especially not Izuku Midoriya. It wasn't long after the incident with Kaken that he was confronted again. The boy he'd attacked was furious at having been humiliated in front of the entire class, and his friends weren't too thrilled either. Since revealing how much progress he'd really made on his quirk, a few other kids thought it was the perfect time to confront him. They would catch him after school outside, or between classes in empty rooms where no prying eyes could report them. Sometimes they'd stick around after gym and corner him in the locker rooms. Those were always particularly gruesome encounters. But the first time they openly picked on him in class, Izuku was shocked. "Hey Deku, wanna explain why you're so weak and entitled? You think you're all that just because you've got a decent quirk?" A kid rambled. He grabbed the front of Izuku's shirt and pulled him out of his seat. "Newsflash. You aren't chic compared to the rest of us. You'll only ever be a dash." He was cut off by an explosion inches from his head. Kaken glared over his shoulder as rage seemed to spill off of him in waves. "Care to shut the hell up, extra?" Kaken growled from behind the bully. The boy's eyes widened in fear and he seemed to freeze before dropping Izuku back into his seat and scurrying away, clutching his ear and muttering about how stupid and unfair everything was. "Why did you do that?" Izuku asked calmly. He stared up at Kaken's glowering face in confusion. "Payback." That wasn't the last time Kaken mysteriously stood up for him. He seemed hell-bent on stopping anyone from messing with Izuku, by any means necessary. The only explanation he offered each time was, "payback." It was unnerving. After years of berating and never once caring what Izuku's bullies did to him, Kaken now seemed obsessed with helping him. It gave Izuku whiplash. He never elaborated or explained, just simply went about his business. When Izuku would try to thank him, Kaken would only seem to get more grumpy and sulk away without another word. If it was his way of returning the favor, like Izuku had before, he'd certainly done so about 100 times over before he ever offered any real reasoning. People actually hesitated before bullying or making snide remarks at him. And without Kaken there to help, Izuku doubted that it would ever have progressed so much in such a short amount of time. "Kaken," Izuku called one afternoon after being rescued by the other. "Kaken, please wait up. Can I walk with you?" "Do you want a premature death, nerd?" Kaken barked as he raised a tensed palm. "No, You never let me thank you, or ever even explain whenever you help me," he answered, "so I decided to just talk while we walk home. We live super close anyways." "Just don't annoy the hell out of me, Deku," Kaken growled. "Okay, first of all, can you not call me that? You know they made it up as an insult, and it's just mean," Izuku requested. "The hell else am I supposed to call you, nerd?" he retorted. "I call you Kaken? Just call me Izuku or something," he answered. "I'd rather drop dead," Kaken replied with a grimace. "And I never told you you could call me Kaken." Izuku frowned at the other boy before replying, "Yes, you did. When we were little. Besides, friends get to call each other by nicknames. That's how it works, Kaken." "We are not friends, nerd." "Yes, we are. We've been friends since we were babies. I've known you my whole life." Izuku exclaimed in disbelief. He stared daggers into the side of Kaken's head until the other looked at him. "No, that was forced, and anyways you were an ugly baby, and I hated you." "I was an adorable baby. My mom told me so." "Nope, you were ugly. I distinctly remember," Kaken declared with a smirk. "Whatever, that's not why I wanted to talk to you," Izuku sighed in defeat. "I don't understand why you're helping me, Kaken. You always say it's payback, like you're trying to get revenge or something, but you're saving me from the JRKS in our class. I don't get it. I'd understand if maybe you wanted to make us equal or something, but you've saved me way more times than I helped you. It makes no sense. Unless you actually care about me, but that makes even less sense because you were always mean to me too. But you aren't mean anymore. You're like an angry guard dog or something. Not that you're a dog, but I just mean it's like, Kaken, this is hard to understand, so can't you just tell me why you're helping me already?" Izuku looked over at the boy beside him expectantly. "You know, if you talked that fast to anyone else, you'd have lost them after about 2 seconds, Kaken muttered. "Oh, I didn't mean. It's just that sometimes I get carried away and I don't mean to ramble, but it just comes out and I dash." "This is exactly what I mean," Kaken cut him off. "You're lucky we grew up together, or else I wouldn't understand a bit of the nonsense you keep spewing." Izuku raised an eyebrow at his friend before asking, "So why are you helping me? And don't say, pay back." Kaken grumbled before growling, "I don't have to explain myself to you, nerd." "Kaken, that's so stupid," You've been helping me for weeks and you won't even let me say thank you. I'm just repaying my debt, you DMN nerd. So shut the hell up and leave me alone. Kaken stormed off in a huff, leaving Izuku to walk the rest of the way home alone. The smaller boy sighed before continuing on his way. After that, Izuku quit trying to thank Kaken, and Kaken quit trying to explain himself to Izuku. It was like a mutual agreement that whenever Izuku was being bullied the other would step in, and they didn't discuss it past that. Izuku wasn't happy with that arrangement, but it wasn't like he could really do anything more. There was no way to help Kaken because he'd get upset and probably explode off his face if he tried. Izuku just relied on the boy whenever he could. It was a hot day in September of their first year in middle school when Kaken finally noticed Izuku was behaving the same way he used to when they were younger. Hey nerd, what's with the sleeves? It's about 1,000,000,000 degrees out, why don't you just put on a t-shirt? Kaken asked as he approached the other. I'm not hot, Kaken. And don't call me a nerd. As if I'd believe that. I'm not as gullible as Aunt Inko or the other extras in this class, he growled, ignoring Izuku's other statement. Kaken, just give it a rest. It doesn't matter. Besides, the kids never bother me in class thanks to you, so it's fine, Izuku muttered. Does that mean they bother you outside of class? Katsuki pried with a glare on his face. You didn't actually think it ever stopped, did you? Izuku looked at the fuming boy beside him in confusion. Of course they wouldn't stop. Kaken glared at him for a moment before turning around to walk away. You're walking home with me today. Don't be effing late. Izuku stared at the boys retreating back in disbelief. Maybe it would stop. After school, Izuku found Kaken and they left the building together. As they exited the front door, someone grabbed Izuku's bag and dragged him away from Kaken, slamming him against the wall as he went. You didn't think a guard dog could save you, did you, Deku? He sneered. He yanked the bag off of the smaller boy, and with it his uniform jacket tore off, revealing bruises covering his arms. You can't hide how weak you are forever, PP. Leave me alone. Izuku cried. Or what? The boy snickered as he drew back a clenched fist. Or I'll explode your FNG brains out, a-hole, Kaken growled as he raised a smoldering palm. Without waiting for a reaction, he sent the kid flying with a blast. He flew backwards and slumped against the pavement. DMN idiots. They do this every day. Mostly, Izuku whispered. Then just walk with me, nerd, he replied with an unreadable expression. Izuku grabbed his jacket and bag from the ground and quickly covered up again. It's hot as hell, just take off the jacket already. But the dash. I've already seen, Kaken retorted. He trailed off with a sigh. What? Aunt Inko doesn't even know, does she? Kaken asked, and Izuku nodded his head. Mom can help and she won't tell, just don't mention I exploded someone's butt, okay? Or else he won't be the only one I do that to today. Katsuki didn't know why he was even helping Izuku. He didn't want to admit it, but he'd paid back whatever debt he owed the other long ago. It didn't matter. Izuku was the only tolerable person at their school, so why shouldn't he help him out? When they reached his house, Katsuki opened the door as quietly as possible, hoping not to alert his mom that he was home. But things never went his way. Katsuki, his mom yelled from the kitchen. Katsuki, you're late. I know, he yelled back just as loud. Why the hell didn't you call? She shouted as she walked into the living room, attention on a bowl she was stirring rapidly. You know you're supposed to let me know if dash. She finally looked up. Izuku, she exclaimed and set down her concoction. She ran over and embraced the boy in a bear hug while saying, It's been so long since you came over. I was sure Katsuki had driven you off by now. She set him down before noticing how he was wincing and clutching his sides. What's wrong? You crushed him half to death. Katsuki yelped. And some kids have been beating him up after school so he's half covered in bruises. I wouldn't be surprised if he had a broken rib or two. What? Mitsuki yelled. Oh no, Auntie, I'm fine. Kaken's exaggerating, Izuku groaned as he held his side. Really? Take off your jacket then, Katsuki replied as he crossed his arms. I don't dash. I thought we came here so the old hag could help you. Or are you just gonna lie and make this worse for yourself? Izuku sighed before shrugging off his exterior layers, exposing the bruised and battered skin underneath. Mitsuki gasped before running to the kitchen and returning with ice and a first aid kit. Katsuki, take him to your room and get started. I need to finish dinner, but it'll only take a few minutes, so I'll be right up. What? I brought him here so you'd help him. Let me finish dinner. Katsuki exclaimed as his mom piled the supplies into his arms. No, it's a new recipe, you've never made it before, and I'm almost done anyways. Go help your friend, she ordered. Complaining under his breath, Katsuki led Izuku up to his bedroom and tossed the supplies onto his desk. He waited for the injured boy to enter before shutting the door and sitting at the desk. Go ahead and sit on the bed, he instructed. Izuku hesitantly sat on the edge of the neatly made bed before giving Katsuki a puzzled look. Well, take off your shirt so I can see what we're dealing with, Katsuki said as he sorted through the first aid kit. What? Izuku said, startled. We're both guys, it's nothing I haven't seen. Get over it, Katsuki rebuffed. That's worse. Izuku exclaimed as his face heated up. Katsuki sighed before turning to the other with a roll of bandages in his hand. What? I mean, he trailed off as he fidgeted with his hands. At least a girl wouldn't have anything to compare me to. Katsuki barked out a laugh. Did you forget the internet exists? He scooted his chair over to the bed before laying out what he needed on the sheets. Izuku, I just need to make sure you don't have a broken rib. That's it. The blood rushed out of his face as he stared at Katsuki in disbelief. Did you just call me Izuku? Shut it, nerd. Do you want to die because your broken bones puncture your lung or what? Just take off your shirt before you croak in my bedroom. Izuku shook his head before finally pulling his shirt off. Katsuki was taken aback by what he saw. The boy's stomach was covered in black and blue bruises as if he'd been kicked about 100 times, and his chest wasn't much better. Though the marks there were starting to turn green and yellow as they healed, which was not a good look on him. What did they do, kick you? Yeah, Izuku replied softly. Oh. Katsuki reached out a tentative hand to the boy's abdomen and applied a slight amount of pressure to his side. Izuku jumped and yelped in pain. Are you trying to kill me? Your mom already made them sore again. I told you. I have to check for broken ribs, dumbass. He returned his palm, albeit much more gently, and felt the boy's ribs to find any major breaks. I dunno, I think this one on the right might be broken, but you might just be shaped funny. My mom will be able to tell. Izuku scoffed and gently touched where Katsuki had talked about. This Essex, he muttered. Katsuki's expression became unreadable as he started unrolling bandages and tending to the boy's wounds. Eventually Mitsuki joined them and confirmed it was indeed a broken rib. She helped finish helping Izuku before leaving the boys to their own devices. Oh, Izuku, honey. I called your mom and told her you'd be staying for dinner tonight. And don't worry, I avoided mentioning that you showed up covered in bruises and needing medical attention, Mitsuki called as she left the room. Dinner will be ready in 10 by the way. Hey nerd, you can walk home with me from now on if you want, Katsuki mumbled. He stared at his palms instead of making eye contact. You mean it? Izuku asked in delight. I guess, but you have to start standing up for yourself. You could beat the shit out of those guys if you tried. It doesn't even matter what they say. We've got like 3 years left there and then we're out for good to whatever high school we want, Katsuki said as he raised his eyes. Izuku was no longer looking at him, and a frown was slowly growing on his face. I know, Kaken, he sighed. Seriously, who cares if they think you'll be a villain? They're bullies with insecure masculinity and inferiority complexes. You know you could be a hero if you tried, Katsuki added. Izuku turned away. That's not the only thing they say anymore. You're not weak either. Your quirk is just as strong as mine, and you know I don't say shit like that just for the hell of it. Nothing they say is true, Katsuki assured Izuku. Some of it is, Izuku muttered almost inaudibly. You can't possibly believe anything they say, Katsuki said. He could feel the anger building in his stomach. It doesn't matter. It's stupid anyway, Izuku said as he fiddled with his shirt seam. No, just tell me so I can knock some sense into your idiotic brain. Really, Kaken, I shouldn't have said anything. I'm sorry, Izuku rambled as he shook his hands. I swear to God, I'll tell Aunt Inko if you don't explain, Katsuki threatened. Just tell me. Izuku continued to try to back out of the topic. You're the one who always calls us friends and stupid shit like that. You can't just say that and then hide stuff from me. Izuku sighed before closing his eyes and muttering as quickly as he could, they say that I'm gay and like boys, and I'm a freak and that I'm going to hell and that I'm disgusting and weird and nobody is ever gonna like me. Huh? Katsuki exclaimed, what the F is wrong with being gay? His palms crackled, and he could feel fear sinking into his stomach on top of his anger. Izuku didn't think it was bad, did he? Apparently a whole lot according to them. Izuku cried as tears welled up in his eyes. He buried his face in his hands and mumbled, I shouldn't have said anything, I'm sorry. I made everything weird. Katsuki stuttered, for once unsure of what to say. He started to reach a hand out to the other but pulled away. I don't care if you're gay, Izuku. Izuku stuttered. He turned to look at Katsuki in the eyes. I don't care, and neither does my mom or Aunt Inko or anyone who actually matters. People who matter don't care about shit like that, Katsuki said, the anger fizzling out of him. How would you know? Izuku cried, tears pouring down his face. My mom is gonna hate me and no one is ever gonna be my friend, and you're gonna leave me because it's gonna be weird because everything is awful and none of it matters and I can't. I know because, he trailed off, indecision written all over his face, I know because I like guys too. He looked at the other, who seemed extremely taken aback. And you can't effing tell anybody or I'll blast you into the afterlife. The only people who know are my parents and that's just because they kept saying annoying shit about future wives, so I told them to shut them up. He was breathing heavy and his fists were clenched as he looked over at the other. There was a beat of silence before Katsuki yelled, well, don't just effing stare at me. Sorry, Kaken, he said as he wiped the tears from his face. You don't think my mom would be mad? The F dash? No, she'll probably pass out from joy, Katsuki growled. That's just how she is. Oh, Izuku breathed, no longer crying. Thank you, Kaken. I'm glad you told me and dash. Don't make it FNG weird with sappy sheet. I already knew. You're just about the most obvious person I know, Katsuki said to stop whatever Izuku was about to say. What? I am not. Izuku denied. You are. I have excellent gaydar. How? I can just tell, nerd, Katsuki replied with a grin. Izuku stared at him before smiling and asking, does this mean we can actually be friends now? We already were, dumbass. Izuku continued walking home with Kaken through the rest of middle school, and the bullying came to an almost complete standstill. However, occasionally when the kids in his class got exceptionally bored, they'd find ways to corner him away from Kaken. As long as they didn't get physical, Izuku wouldn't use his quirk on them, so they became particularly skilled at getting a reaction with just their words. They found all the weaknesses in his walls and would tear him down slowly. It just happened that on one of those days when they were looking for a little fun, Izuku was staying late at school to turn in extra credit, and Kaken had left ahead of him. What do we have here? One of the bullies sneered. Leave me alone, Izuku said as he tried pushing past them out the door to leave. Why should we? Your little guard dog isn't here and we're so bored, the second said as he shoved Izuku to the floor, causing his books to spill everywhere. What's this? Hero analysis for the future, the first read as he picked up one of Izuku's journals. Give it back, Izuku stammered as he picked up the rest of his books. No, I don't think so. You aren't going to be a hero. It doesn't matter how much you try to convince yourself that you might. Someone with a quirk as evil as yours will never become a pro. They'd kick you out of any hero program as soon as you showed them what you do. He tossed the journal out an open window where it fell into a pond below. Not to mention they'd never let a freak guy who likes D become a pro. It's disgusting. Unnatural, the last boy finally spoke up. His friends nodded as they advanced on Izuku, who was still kneeling on the floor. Why don't you take a FING swan dive off the roof and pray you're reborn with a hero's quirk? And pray it fixes whatever F'd you up and made you gay, the bully said as he knocked Izuku's things out of his hands for a second time. Tears were beginning to form in his eyes as they sauntered away, cackling with glee. Izuku slowly got his things together again and made his way out of the building, looking for his waterlogged notebook. Are they crazy? What if I actually jumped? He muttered to himself as he fished his journal out of the pond. He patted it dry with his sleeve before putting it carefully into his bag. Seeing as he was already on the other side of the school, Izuku opted to take the longer route home instead of going back through the school and risking a second encounter with the bullies. He was slow-going as he thought over everything they had said. He knew rationally that he could be a hero and there was nothing wrong with liking guys. Kaken has drilled it into his head about 1,000,000 times after the night he'd come out. But hearing over and over how disgusting and unnatural it was made him question if people would ever accept him outside of the friendship he'd built with Kaken. And on top of that, how was he supposed to ever find a decent guy to fall in love with? It all made him feel hopeless, and it made what the bullies had told him to do seem all the more appealing. Lost in thought, Izuku didn't hear the villain approaching from behind. The sludge monster was on him before he could even think about defending himself. I hit the jackpot with this one. The power this kid is packing, not even All Might can stop me, he shouted as black tendrils spilled from his green liquid body. Izuku clawed at his throat in agony, unable to breathe as slime filled his mouth and nose. Wow, the kickback on this quirk is insane. I'm already feeling it, the villain exclaimed in surprise. How do you do this, kid? He hollered, finally addressing Izuku. But his vision was already swimming with black as he struggled to take in any air. This couldn't be it. He wasn't really ready to die. What about Kaken and his mom? Izuku continued to claw at the sludge, but he could feel his strength waning even as the monster stopped using his quirk. He needed a miracle. Weren't there any heroes around? Or police? Anyone who could help him? His vision went entirely black and his arms fell to his sides as his consciousness dissipated. He didn't hear or feel the rush of wind as his savior came to his rescue. Izuku woke with a start as he felt a firm hand against his cheek. You're awake. Thought we lost you there, All Might chanted before standing up and preparing to leave. All Might? Izuku shouted in shock. Oh, an autograph. Could you sign dash? Already done. All Might declared. Thank you for saving me. Can I ask a question? Please. You're my favorite hero, and I have to know. Izuku begged as the pro turned to leave. Sorry kid, I must be on my way. Maybe another time, leave a post on my webpage. All Might replied as he continued to go. Please. Izuku called after his hero. But All Might was already leaping into the air. Overcome, Izuku reacted on instinct and grabbed onto the hero's leg. All Might, he garbled as his lips struggled to form coherent words against the rushing wind. What? Kid, you have to let go. This is dangerous. All Might shouted, before realizing how disastrous that would be for the boy. Izuku was still trying to speak, so All Might cut him off saying, Never mind, just hold on and close your eyes and mouth already. The hero landed atop a tall building, allowing Izuku to safely detach from his leg. Coughing, Izuku finally managed to speak. All Might, please. I just need to know. Ever since I was a kid, people told me I couldn't be a hero. And for a long time it was because I didn't even have a quirk, but when I finally got one, they said it was a villainous quirk and I could never be a pro with something like it. My best friend has this amazing quirk and he's going to get into UA, but I can barely control mine, Izuku continued, not noticing the steam pouring of the #1 hero. My body can't even withstand using it for very long, and it's super hard to even use a little bit. But I want to be a hero who people can look to with a smile because they know they're safe when I arrive. I want to help people. So I guess what I'm asking is, can someone like me, who can't use their quirk, become a hero? He finally looked up to see a deflated, skinny version of All Might standing before him. Well, where's All Might? Who are you? All Might coughed and sat down before explaining, I am All Might, kid. The #1 hero, a symbol of peace. This is what I look like after fighting crime and saving people. This is the cost of being a pro. He went on to explain that after a serious battle a few years ago he lost the ability to use his quirk fully and along with it part of his internal organs. Izuku was stunned, unable to comprehend that a hero like All Might had such a serious handicap to his quirk. So, if you can only use part of your quirk, do you think I could be a hero too? Maybe I could save people only using my quirk a little, just like you. Izuku exclaimed once he understood. No. I'm sorry, kid, but a hero who can't use 100% of their quirk is only endangering the others around them. If you can't get your quirk under control, it could even be a danger to the people you're trying to save when you do use it. I don't know what this quirk is, but if people say it's a villain's quirk they probably have a reason to, especially when you can't fully control it, All Might replied with a solemn expression. Honestly, kid, there are other ways to help. Join the police force. It's honest work, and they always need more men like you who want to save people. But Kid, I need you to promise you won't blab about what you saw today. Being a hero is dangerous, and if villains knew I had this weakness, they could exploit it, All Might said as he left for a second time. I promise. Thanks, kid. It was Midoriya, right? Yeah, Izuku confirmed, the usual spark in his eyes completely extinguished. The pro left without another word, leaving Izuku on top of the roof alone. To say he didn't consider jumping in that moment would be a lie. He just had his lifelong dream crushed by his idol, and mere minutes before been told to take a swan dive from the roof by kids who'd been tormenting him his entire life. All Might even said there might have been some truth to what they'd said. But he didn't. He climbed down the dozens of flights of stairs and began his walk home in a daze. He questioned everything Kaken had told him over the years. How could he become a hero? When he was almost home, a commotion broke his trance. A villain was attacking, and it seemed the pros weren't stopping him. What was the issue? How strong was this villain? When he heard an explosion, he couldn't help but go over to investigate. To his horror, he saw the very same sludge monster that had attacked him earlier. But All Might had captured him. Izuku's hands began to shake as he realized what must have happened. He must have caused All Might to accidentally release the villain when he grabbed onto him. This was his fault. His stomach churned and a voice in the back of his head regretted not jumping when he had the chance. Then something made him forget all of that. A flash of blonde spiky hair and an explosion drew him back to reality without warning. Kaken. Without even stopping to think, Izuku pushed past the crowd and into the fight. His legs carrying him forward before his mind could catch up. Almost on instinct he launched his bag at the sludge villain, causing his papers and books to fly everywhere for the third time that day. His journal hit the villain right in the eye, disorienting him enough to let Izuku past his defenses and the explosions rapidly being fired off. Kaken, he cried. Tears streamed down both boys' faces as they made eye contact. I'm sorry, Kaken, I'm sorry. He tore at the villain's body, freeing the other's mouth. What are you doing here, you dumb nerd? It's not safe, he shouted, his throat so sore from the sludge that it came out hoarse and pained. I couldn't leave you. The pros aren't even helping. Izuku yelled back through sobs. Then use your demon quirk before we both get killed. Aye, Izuku stuttered. His mind flashed back to All Might's words. I can't, what if I hurt someone? They're already getting hurt. Kaken began before sludge surged into his mouth again. You again? Get back, Pipsqueak. Unless you want to join this kid, the sludge villain roared. Let go of Kaken. Izuku shouted as dark matter surged from his body. It encased them in a sphere until it was just those three. The explosions did nothing to break the walls as the matter absorbed everything the villains sent at them. Izuku's hands filled with energy and turned black as he concentrated raw dark energy into them. Without thinking, he plunged his hand into the slime and grabbed Kaken's arm, yanking him from the sludge. The walls fell away as soon as Kaken was free, and Izuku dragged them both away from the villain and against the alley's wall. Heroes rushed in trying to find the source of the unfamiliar power, but were soon pushed back by the villain. Even without Kaken's explosions, he was a formidable opponent. All hope seemed lost before All Might appeared. With one punch he sent the sludge villain's body flying again. After that, heroes rushed toward the two boys. Izuku's hands were still filled with energy, and he stood in front of Kaken, ready to unleash it onto anyone who came near. Kaken placed a hand on his shoulder and muttered in his ear, "Calm down. It's just heroes now. They aren't gonna hurt us." As if just then realizing what was going on, Izuku's arms fell down, and a new bout of tears poured down his face. He fell to his knees exhausted and Kaken followed, equally as worn out. "I'm sorry, Kaken," Izuku cried. "No, you saved me. None of the pros could even touch the villain. So stop apologizing," Katsuki croaked. This just led to more tears on Izuku's part. A few heroes brought the boys to a nearby ambulance to make sure they were okay. Once they were both deemed healthy enough to go home, they were loaded into a police car and driven home. An officer called their parents, and Inko decided to meet the car at the Bakugu's home instead of waiting for the car at their apartment. On the way home, Izuku turned to Kaken even though he was so tired he was about to pass out and said, "All Might told me I couldn't be a hero." Tears returned to his eyes as he looked away from the other. "Huh. Are you FNG with me right now?" he exclaimed. "He said if I couldn't control my quirk, I'd just be a danger to the people I wanted to save. And I told him about how the bullies at school said I'll only ever be a villain, and he said if they were saying that, there was probably a reason." His eyes drifted shut and he leaned against the door of the car, almost too exhausted to continue speaking. Kaken was taken aback. He stared at the green-haired boy that he'd spent years convincing he wasn't what the idiotic kids had told him he was, and watched as tears slowly slid down his face. One person had crushed every dream he'd ever had. He was completely worn out, and the last thing he needed was to be yelled at by Kaken, so instead he just unbuckled and scooted over to the other, leaning his head on his shoulder. "That's a load of bullshit, Izuku. You saved me today." Ignoring what Kaken had said, Izuku continued, "And he left me on a roof." Before Kaken could ask why that mattered, Izuku added, "And some kid told me to take a swan dive off the roof earlier today." Silent sobs shook his body. Kaken lifted his head off of the other's shoulder and stared in horror at what Izuku had told him. At that moment the car pulled into Kaken's driveway, and the door suddenly burst open. "Izuku, baby, are you okay? Oh my god, you're crying. Why are you crying?" Inko rambled as she took in the sight before her. Izuku pushed past her without a word and rushed into the house that he'd become familiar with over the last 2 years. "Katsuki, what's wrong with him? What happened?" Inko exclaimed as the front door shut behind her son. He's just shaken up. I'll go check on him," Kaken mumbled as he got out of the car and chased after Izuku, ignoring his mom as he passed her. Kaken found Izuku out cold on his bed, tears drying on his cheeks. He wasn't even under a blanket. Kaken covered him in a spare blanket before going back downstairs to tell his mom he was okay. She crushed him in a bear hug the moment he stepped into the kitchen where she and Inko had been sitting. "What happened to you two?" Mitsuki questioned as she released him. A villain attacked and I got caught. But Izuku saved me," Kaken explained vaguely. "Sweetie, you're gonna have to be a lot more specific than that," his mom said as she gave him a look. "I'm tired. I'm just gonna go to bed. I just wanted to tell you we were both okay before Aunt Inko had a heart attack," Kaken said as he moved to leave. Katsuki, where did Izuku go?" Inko asked before he could escape. "Passed out on my bed," Kaken said roughly before leaving. Mitsuki stared after her son in shock. "Mitsuki, what's wrong?" Inko asked. "He must seriously be tired or something is seriously wrong," she replied. "He doesn't ever call me mom." Katsuki woke to the smell of bacon and eggs coming from the kitchen early in the morning. Izuku was still out from the day before, but Katsuki chose to just let him keep sleeping. He made his way downstairs to find Inko bustling around the kitchen frantically. "Oh Katsuki, where do you keep your the clampy at your tongs and jars?" Inko babbled as she checked a cabinet near the fridge. Katsuki wordlessly opened a drawer right next to the stove and handed her a pair of tongs and then opened the pantry and pulled out a fresh mason jar and lid. "Oh thank you dear," Inko said as she accepted the utensils, with a pat to his cheek. Katsuki watched her move about the kitchen in a flurry. "Auntie, what are you doing?" Katsuki finally spoke up, his voice thick with the lingering effects of sleep. "Oh, she turned to face him after finishing with a pan of bacon. I figured I could help out with breakfast since your family was so kind to let Izuku and I stay here, so I went to the store and got a few things and… She trailed off before turning away quickly and continuing to work on the various foods. Katsuki heard her sniffle and figured that was his cue to leave. He passed his mom on his way back to his room and just shrugged when she asked what was going on. He carefully eased the door to his room open as quietly as possible to avoid waking Izuku, but to his surprise the other was already up and moving about the room. "Izuku?" he asked as he entered, letting the door shut behind him. "Hey, do you have any clothes I could borrow? Mine are all dirty, and I slept in them," Izuku asked without making eye contact. "I might have something that will fit in my closet," he replied quietly as he moved to look. He silently looked through his clothes, finding the smallest shirt he owned, and then rummaged through a drawer to find pants that might fit the other. He handed them off while trying to catch his gaze. "Izuku?" he asked again. Izuku ignored him and just changed quickly, not facing the other. The cargo pants Katsuki had produced were just beginning to get too short to wear but were still a size or two too big before Izuku cuffed them, but the shirt fit surprisingly well if not a bit baggy for Izuku's taste. Izuku sat on the edge of the bed soundlessly. "Your mom is stress cooking," Katsuki said as he sat at his desk facing the green-haired boy. "Oh, sorry," Izuku responded before drawing his knees to his chest and scooting back on the bed until his back hit the wall. "She tends to do that when she's nervous." "It's fine, she even went out and bought her own ingredients even though we already had them all," he replied before rising and sitting beside the other. "Are we?" He began before glancing at the other. I know that you always tell me I'm not a villain or anything," Izuku began, consciously avoiding bringing up the comments about the roof he'd made the day before, but what All Might said was a bunch of bullshit. Katsuki glared at the entrance to his room. He had a point. Why would so many people say I'm a villain if I wasn't? If I really had a chance to be a hero, people would notice, Izuku replied as tears collected in his eyes. "No, they're just bullies. They found someone who they thought they could control and they targeted them. It just happened to be you. And unexpected people become heroes all the time," Katsuki answered sternly. "No, they don't," Izuku mumbled. "Izuku, even if they didn't, you aren't unexpected. You have an amazing quirk. I tell you that every time you bring this up," Katsuki argued. "But, Kaken, I can't control it. I could hurt someone." "Yes, you can. How do you explain yesterday? You saved me and not even one person got hurt by you. That was different. You were in trouble, I didn't have any choice. I don't even know how I did that." Izuku cried, tears openly falling down his cheeks at that point. "Bullshit," Katsuki yelled. "You practice all the time. I know you do. You never could have done that a year ago. Not even in an emergency. You gain more control every day. Imagine how much faster that would progress at a school like UA with Dash. We've been over this. I'm never getting into UA." Izuku yelled angrily, cutting Katsuki off. "Maybe you'll get in Kaken, but I would never even get past the practical exam." Katsuki scoffed before finally looking at Izuku. The other's fists were clenched so tightly that his nails dug into his palms and tears poured down his face. Katsuki's scowl faltered for a moment when he saw how upset he was. He watched the other struggle to stop his hands shaking and wipe the tears from his face. Katsuki could remember the days before Izuku's quirk manifested when he'd talk about getting into the hero course even without a quirk. At the time it set him off, but now he missed the days when Izuku radiated confidence. "Izuku, you could. You could be the top of the class if you tried," Katsuki said, much calmer than before. "You keep saying that, but it's not true," Izuku cried, not realizing how the other watched him. "It is true. Anyone with sense can see that," Katsuki answered. "Apparently not a All Might, the #1 H-hero and my idol for the past 13 years. Izuku sobbed. "One person's opinion doesn't matter." Katsuki growled. "Then why does your opinion matter?" Izuku cried hopelessly. "When everyone else in the world says I'm a V-villain and weak, and I'll just hurt people? They're just jealous." Katsuki yelled, tired of fighting the other on this so early in the morning but unwilling to drop it either. "Kaken, nobody would be jealous of me," Izuku mumbled. Katsuki sighed loudly before turning away from the distraught boy. I am. Huh. Izuku stared at the other in shock. Tears continued to stain his face, but his breathing evened out considerably. I said, I am. Katsuki replied. You have this crazy awesome quirk. You can do anything. Defense, offense, long-range attacks, hand-to-hand. You can absorb even my strongest blasts. You can put all the energy or whatever in your hands and punch harder than anyone I know. You could probably shoot it too, or use it to capture villains like tentacles. You could use it to do anything. Literally anything. It's just crazy matter that does whatever you want it to, but it happens to be black, making it kinda eerie. But you have so much potential. He finally stopped talking and looked over at Izuku. If I don't pass out first, Izuku muttered. Oh my god. Katsuki yelled. Izuku, you can work on stamina. I'm glad you think all that, Kaken, but dash. I don't think it. I know. Katsuki yelled. Since the day your quirk manifested, I've been thinking about all the different ways you could use it. It's so cool. It's cooler than All Might or Endeavor or Edgeshot or Kamui Woods or anyone. No, it's N dash. I swear if you don't accept the effing compliment, I'm gonna blow your butt up. Katsuki threatened. It's not like that, Kakane, and you know it. Izuku replied angrily, hands clasped and eyes watery. Yeah, I know, Katsuki answered, completely deflated. Let's just go eat before it gets cold, he said, rising from the bed. They both followed the scent of freshly cooked bacon and eggs down to the kitchen and ate their fill, thanking Izuku's mom as they went. After finishing breakfast, Katsuki turned to Izuku and asked if he wanted to go try training, to which he agreed. Great, then we can stop by your house on the way to get you some clothes that fit, Katsuki called as he pulled his shoes on by the door. Yeah, Izuku answered, doing the same beside him. They stood and swung the door open, revealing All Might stood on the Bakuga's doormat, hand poised to knock. Oh, my apologies, boys, All Might said in shock. Izuku froze, not expecting to have to face the hero again so soon. Why the F are you here? Katsuki growled, poised to slam the door. I am here to speak with you both about yesterday's incident. Are either of your parents around? I feel they should be a part of the conversation, All Might replied boldly. Katsuki glared at the pro before responding angrily, both our moms are eating. Oh, sorry to intrude, but this is a very urgent matter. Being the #1 hero keeps me busy. All Might added, as proud as ever. Katsuki sighed bitterly before asking Izuku to go get his mom. The other jolted from his trance after being addressed and quickly left the scene to retrieve Mitsuki. She came rushing to the door, followed closely by Izuku's mom. Oh, you were serious? Mitsuki stuttered quietly to Izuku before darting to the door and addressing the hero, All Might. Please come in. Have a seat and I'll make us some tea. She guided the hero into their sitting room and hurried to the kitchen to boil something to drink. The pro sat awkwardly on the couch across from Inko and the boys. All Might, I just wanted to thank you for saving Izuku and Katsuki. Inko cried, never did I think I'd get the chance to do so in person, but you don't understand how grateful I am. If anything happened to my son, well, I don't know what I'd do, so just thank you so much. Oh, all in a day's work, All Might replied, a blush appearing on his cheeks. Izuku sat near Katsuki, still not having said a word to the pro. He just seemed to watch him, gears ever turning in his mind. It was almost unnoticeable, but his hands had begun to shake, and he was obviously stifling the urge to begin muttering to himself. On the other hand, Katsuki scowled at the hero defensively. He scrutinized the pro's every move and occasionally sent Izuku a silent and worried glance. Sorry to keep you waiting, Mitsuki called as she entered the room carrying a tray with tea and enough mugs for all 5 of them. She quickly distributed the beverages and then sat beside Inko. So what brings you to my home, All Might? Ahem dash, All Might cleared his throat before beginning. I actually came to discuss yesterday's incident. It appears both your sons have extremely powerful quirks with great potential for the future. Bakugo here with his explosives, and Midoriya with, well, that is a bit unknown, but both seemed to have extensive promise in the hero field with potential to make it as pros one day. Izuku froze at All Might's words. His mind short-circuited for a moment before he looked at Katsuki in a panic, but the other was already out of his seat and yelling. "How can you say that after what you told him on the roof?" Bakugo roared. "Roof?" Inko muttered, looking to Mitsuki for answers and finding none. "Well, All Might stammered. "No. How can you sit there and talk about his potential to make it as a pro when you told him he'd just endanger people before you even knew what his quirk was?" Katsuki continued in a frenzy. Izuku grabbed Katsuki's shirt and began murmuring for him to sit down and just leave it alone, but the other didn't seem to hear or was just ignoring his friend. "You think you're so great, but I bet there was a time when you couldn't control your quirk very well either, and yet you say shit like that to a kid. You knew how much it meant to him too. You dash." "Katsuki!" Mitsuki yelled, smacking her son hard on the back of the head. "Not another word. I know you're upset, so just cool down." She shoved her son back into his seat before bowing deeply to the hero and apologizing. "Oh, it's quite all right, ma'am," All Might replied frantically. He's clearly frustrated with the events from the other day and... The hero was interrupted as Izuku quickly rose from his seat and darted out of the room and through the back door. His hands covered his face where Katsuki knew tears must be falling. The furious teen began to rise from his seat before All Might beat him to it. "I can go talk with him." "A pep talk from the #1 hero is sure to cheer him up," All Might declared with a forced grin as he chased the boy out the door. Katsuki sat stunned as conflicting feelings bubbled in his stomach. Should he stop the pro? Surely he'd do nothing but more damage, and Izuku didn't want to see him anyway. But maybe he would fix things? Trusting a practical stranger with his best friend brought a bad taste into his mouth, and yet he wasn't moving to intervene either. Izuku collapsed on the steps of his best friend's back porch. After hearing what All Might had said on the roof, he'd been crushed. Had almost jumped off the DMN building. To hear so many conflicting things in just over a day was messing with his head. How could he believe what the pro had just said? Was he lying on the roof for now? After all those years of bullies telling him he was a villain and then All Might confirming it, surely what he'd claimed now was just to get on his good side or something. It didn't make sense. None of it did. His mind could barely believe what Kaken had told him, and now he was just more confused and upset. He just wanted to escape, just for a minute. All Might found himself on a quaint porch attached to the back of the Bakugo residence. There he found Izuku Midoriya huddled on the steps, silent sobs racking his body. To think he'd caused all this with a stupid offhand comment on a rooftop. He slowly approached the boy and sat beside him, however he didn't even seem to notice the pro's presence. Young Midoriya, I wanted dash." He was interrupted when Izuku practically jumped out of his skin and let out a frightened yelp upon realizing his hero was right beside him. "All Might." "I'm sorry," Izuku cried. "No, kid, it's okay," the pro assured. "I actually came to apologize. What I said on the roof. It was careless. Bakugo was right. I didn't even ask what your quirk was before agreeing with what you told me others had said." Izuku stared at the ground, processing the hero's words. The rational part of him knew that what he said was true, and that it was a genuine apology, but despite that he still felt hopeless. Becoming a hero seemed 1,000 miles away and completely impossible even though all signs pointed down that path. He glanced at the hero beside him briefly. If this had happened even a week ago, he'd have been practically in tears of joy at being so close to All Might, but now it only reminded him of what he felt like he couldn't accomplish. So he remained silent, agreeing with the pro would only force him to bury how he felt, but rebutting him somehow felt wrong. All Might watched the gears turning in the boy's head before adding, "Really, I didn't see much of your quirk in action, but I can already tell you have immense potential to become a successful pro hero." He waited for any response, but the green-haired boy beside him remained rooted motionless to the spot. What is your quirk, kid?" Izuku finally looked at All Might and mumbled, "Abyss." "Abyss." All Might repeated as he fidgeted uncomfortably. "How does it work?" he asked carefully, hoping to right the wrong he'd made before. It's like, Izuku sighed before looking away and holding up his palm. I can concentrate dark energy into my body, he began as the tips of his fingers slowly turned black and seemed to radiate power. Oh, or if I want, I can create dark matter and manipulate or mold it however I want. His fingertips reverted back to a soft pink skin tone, and small tendrils of inky black matter danced in his palm. He swirled the matter around, eventually allowing it to dissipate into the air. But it tends to really wear me out, so if I use it like I did when Kaken got attacked, I end up crashing and sleeping for hours afterwards. I see, All Might replied quietly, brows drawn together in concentration. And your classmates called you a villain? He asked in confusion. They dash. His head fell to his knees as he recalled all the times he'd been bullied and cornered over the years. It looks like it, doesn't it? It looks like a villain's quirk. All dark and twisty and scary. And I couldn't control it at all when I got it, and I could have hurt people. He trailed off before remembering what Kaken had told him that morning. Kaken says that they're jealous of me because my quirk has potential. And he says they just picked somebody who wouldn't fight back and targeted me. There was other stuff too, but it doesn't even matter. He groaned as he lifted his head and instead covered his face with his hands, resting his elbows on his knees. It matters. Those students were in the wrong. To make fun of someone just because you're jealous or scared. It's wrong, All Might said as he tried to comfort the boy. Yeah, sure, but it's not like they'll stop or anything. So it doesn't matter. I've put up with them for like 8 years, the rest of this one isn't gonna kill me, he answered in frustration. He remembered the kids telling him to kill himself and when All Might left him on the roof and what he'd told Kaken in the car and… Probably, he muttered inaudibly. Even so, it's unacceptable, All Might commented, still deep in concentration. They sat in silence for a moment as All Might seemed to debate his next statement, and Izuku seemed lost in his thoughts. Something you said about how your quirk works? It reminded me of my quirk, All Might blurted suddenly. Completely taken off guard, Izuku whipped his head around to stare at the pro beside him in shock. What? About concentrating the energy in your body. That's actually very similar to how my quirk works. Izuku just stared in astonishment. I build up power and then release it in close combat attacks like my punches, he explained. It's not exactly the same, but I think combining some techniques with those of other pros could help you establish a basis for a fighting style. I don't even know if I can get into a hero course though, Izuku said. Huh. All Might replied, seemingly ripped from his train of thought. What do you mean? With a quirk like yours, with a little more training, you could get into UA's hero course on recommendation, he added in bewilderment. Who would even recommend me? Izuku asked in exasperation. The conversation was giving him whiplash at this point, from despair to confusion to this? I would. Katsuki glanced at Izuku from across his friend's bedroom. They had finally made it out of the house after All Might had left. The pro had returned a few minutes after chasing after Izuku and mumbled some excuse about needing to do hero work, so Katsuki had gone to check on his best friend to find him already on his way inside muttering about how they should get going or there wouldn't be enough time to train before lunch. So the pair made their way to Izuku's house where the green-haired boy was now flitting around his room in search of an outfit. He hadn't said much to Katsuki yet about whatever All Might had told him, and Katsuki was beginning to worry. The other hadn't stopped mumbling softly either, and his brain seemed to be in overdrive trying to work out something. Finally, Katsuki broke the silence. What did the a-hole even say to you? He growled in annoyance. Oh, sorry, Kaken. I was mumbling, wasn't I? Izuku replied as he stopped short, mismatching socks in one hold and a pair of jeans in the other. Yeah, you were. And you can't wear jeans to train, idiot, Katsuki scoffed as he stood from Izuku's bed. Just sit down and tell me whatever the hell All Might said that's got you so freaked out, and I'll find you something to wear. Okay. You know where everything is? Izuku asked as he shuffled to his desk chair. Of course I do, dumbass. Now spill, or I'll make you wear something stupid, Katsuki threatened as he searched Izuku's dresser. Well, okay, Izuku struggled to formulate a coherent sentence. So he asked what my quirk was, and so I showed him. Well, actually before that he said sorry for saying all that stuff on the roof, and that was okay, I guess. I didn't really answer him, so he just kept talking. He talks a lot more than I expected. Anyway, he said you were right about how he was careless. Which I thought you should know, because you were really upset with him dash. Still am. But I know. And so then he asked about my quirk, and I showed him a little bit, and he actually said it was similar to his quirk. Oh, but I forgot, before he said that, he was kinda confused about why I was bullied because he agreed with you that I have a good quirk, I guess. And so I sorta explained what you said about how everyone's just jealous. Which I still don't understand, by the way. But he got it. And then, oh, Izuku's expression darkened for a moment before he quickly continued in his disjointed story. Well, anyways, then he said my quirk reminded him of his, like how I can concentrate energy in my body, so apparently that's how his quirk works too. You almost done because I have your clothes, Katsuki interjected quickly. Almost, Izuku said as he grabbed the outfit from Katsuki's hands, and then he started talking about combining techniques from different pros with some of his moves and all sorts of crazy things, and I stopped him and told him I didn't even know if I could make it into a hero course. But he just nonchalantly said I could get into UA on recommendation. And so I was confused, and it was already hard enough to process that he actually thought my quirk was any good even after I told him about how much it wears me out. So I got frustrated and asked who would even recommend me, because who would write? At this point he was flamboyantly talking with his hands and was on the edge of his seat. And All Might said he would. What? Katsuki asked, confused. Wait, the #1 hero, All Might, said he'd recommend you for UA's hero course? Yeah. Izuku yelled in excitement. Well, with training, he said. But Kaken, that's not even the craziest part yet. You're effing you with me, right? Katsuki exclaimed, ignoring Izuku's last statement. No, but Kaken dash. Holy sheet. Holy fing sheet, Katsuki muttered. I knew you were good, but Izuku. Kaken, listen, he told me to meet him at Takoba Municipal Beach tomorrow for training, Izuku blurted as he grabbed the other by the shoulders. Shut the F up, Katsuki deadpanned. He told me to meet him at Takoba Municipal Beach, and he would help train me to use my quirk and build up my stamina, so I can actually do well on entrance exams. No FNG way. Yes, FING way, Izuku said, maintaining eye contact. I'm still set at him, Katsuki muttered, but a grin was spreading across his face, try as he might to hide it. I know, if you weren't, I'd be more concerned, Izuku replied quietly, releasing his friend. Holy sheet, Izuku. This is great. Now we can both go to UA and become heroes. And All Might is gonna train you for the entrance exams. Holy sheet, you're gonna FING kill it in the practical exam. And you're smart as hell, so the written exam will be easy for you. Unless he actually recommends you, then who the F knows what the test will be like, but All Might's gonna train you so it'll be easy as hell, Katsuki rambled excitedly. Izuku's face seemed to drop as his friend continued to talk about everything he was going to be able to do now. Slowly, he backed away, the excitement wearing off and anxiety setting in. He sat at his desk and began fiddling with the hem of Katsuki's borrowed shirt. Finally noticing the other, Katsuki stopped mid-rant. What's wrong? I know it's great but dash. No, stop right there, Katsuki said, seemingly drawn back to reality as he glared at Izuku. But nothing. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Even if he's an a-hole who doesn't think before he speaks and is completely self-obsessed, he's still the #1 hero who sees your potential. Just like I do and Aunt Inko does and Mom and Dad do. Now finally someone who can actually get you places sees it. So stop with the worrying. But Kaken, he barely knows me. What if once we start training he realizes that he's wasting his time on me? What if he sees how little stamina I have, and he just chucks me to the side? Or what if I just can't do what he asks me to, and I totally fail? Or if I accidentally hurt someone or him? Or if I'm seriously not as good as everyone thinks I am and this whole time everyone's just been building me up in their heads, but I really have no potential at all, and I just let everyone down? Or you never know, this could be peak for me. What if this is as good as I'm gonna get? What if all of All Might's training is for nothing because I can't get any better? Are you done? Katsuki huffed. No, Izuku wailed. So many things could go wrong. Okay, well, what if you get there, and you completely amaze him with your talent and all the work you've put in over the years on your quirk, and he just builds on that, and you become amazing, and he recommends you for UA's hero course, and you pass with flying colors and become the #1 student in our class at UA, and eventually train as hard as you can using everything All Might taught you and everything the teachers there teach you, and you become the new #1 hero after All Might retires. Kaken, that's never gonna happen. How do you know? Katsuki yelled in exasperation. Because I just do. And getting my hopes up for some pipe dream that is never gonna happen is stupid and will only end up leaving me disappointed in the end. Izuku cried. How is it stupid? The best heroes save the most people. They work on offense and defense, and they care enough about citizens not to get them hurt. And on top of that, the really good ones know to limit property damage and prioritize the victims while getting the job done and apprehending the villain. Tell me how your quirk isn't perfect for all of that. I can't use it. Which is why you're gonna train with All Might. Izuku sighed, knowing Katsuki wouldn't understand. I know you think I'm being unrealistic, but all that doubt you have is what's actually unrealistic. Your stupid but brain is lying to you, Katsuki added. Izuku groaned in frustration. I know. Hey, I know, but I can't stop. All these worries just keep rushing into my head, and I can't stop them. That's why you have me, dumbass, Katsuki replied. We're going tomorrow. We? Izuku exclaimed. Yes, bitch. You didn't seriously think I was letting you get all the glory? You may have the perfect quirk to be #1, but that's not stopping me from taking the top spot. I'm using everything I've got, even if that means writing off your sorry but for a minute, Katsuki answered as if it were obvious. Besides, I don't trust that idiot. He'll probably say something stupid again and ruin what little confidence I scraped together for you over all these effing years. Seeing that he was not changing Katsuki's mind in this century, Izuku just gave up trying to stop him before even starting. Apparently they were a package deal for now. Izuku kept his mouth shut as he and Katsuki approached the beach on Sunday. Katsuki had forbidden him to say anything negative about what was about to happen, meaning no what-ifs, no self-doubt, and no mumbling. It was probably for the best, as once the rule was set, Izuku was so focused on not mumbling that he almost forgot to be worried. Almost. Not entirely. Luckily for the duo, All Might's location was not difficult to find. The beach was notorious for being an unofficial landfill and dumping ground for junk and appliances that people no longer needed. It was filthy, and very few serious attempts had been made to clean the area. Why the hero had chosen this spot for training was beyond Katsuki, but that was for them to find out. Izuku stopped the other at the entrance of the beach for a moment. Wait here while I go tell him you came, okay? It'll just take a second. I promise. Fine, nerd. But I'm not waiting more than 5 minutes, Katsuki replied, as he checked the time on his phone. 5 minutes and counting. Thank you, Kaken, Izuku called as he ran into the garbage heap in search of the #1 hero. It didn't take long to find him. He was dressed in casual clothes, and in his skinny form, as Izuku expected. Ah, young Midoriya. Right on time. Are you ready to begin your training? All Might asked upon seeing the frazzled boy. But actually, All Might, Kaken decided to dash. Izuku was cut short by the pro. I'm glad you brought him up. I know you two are friends, but these training sessions must remain secret. We can't have reporters or overzealous fans interrupting your practice, can we? Well, you see, I had already T-dash. I understand keeping secrets must be difficult, but this cannot reach the public. If people knew about my true form, villains would exploit my weakness, and fans would lose hope. The world would lose its symbol of peace. It's a heavy burden, but one we must bear nonetheless. I'm sorry you have to bear it at such a young age, but that is dash. What the F dash? Katsuki yelled, phone in hand as 5 minutes had supposedly passed. As if on instinct, All Might burst into his muscled form. Bakugu, this is not what it looks like. However, moments after his transformation, he reverted back to his natural state with a puff of smoke and a spurt of blood from his mouth. Katsuki ignored the pro who was frantically trying to explain away whatever he'd seen. You couldn't have told me the world's #1 hero is actually an overhyped Bruce Banner impressionist? He jeered with a smirk. He turned to address the hysterical hero beside him. You know, I might not have realized it was you if you hadn't gone all Hulk on us. Kaken. You can't say that. He's the #1 hero. Izuku squealed as second-hand embarrassment took hold. He looks like a limp noodle without his muscles, he retorted. So, you want him to help train you too, don't you? Izuku cried. I guess, Katsuki answered grumpily, looking the distraught hero up and down. He's stillin', but even if he doesn't look like he could even hurt a fly like this. See? But you should really introduce yourself. All you've done is scream at him and call him names, Izuku mumbled. Katsuki whirled on his friends with a scowl, hand raised to send an explosion directly at Izuku's face. But nonetheless, he turned to the pro. I'm Katsuki Baku, same school and year as this dumbass. He informed the hero with a jab towards Izuku, and I'm gonna be #1 sooner than you can say, I am here. All Might's raving antics came to a stop upon hearing Katsuki's words. You want me to train you with Midoriya? Yes. Was that not clear when I came here when I could be doing literally anything else right now? Katsuki growled in agitation. I'm sorry, All Might. I didn't want to reveal your secret because I know how important and dangerous it is, but Kaken isn't gonna tell anyone. I promise. We only really have each other, so dash. Shut the F up, nerd. Katsuki yelled, a slight blush appearing on his cheeks. Nobody cares about that sappy sheet. But it's true. Who would you even tell? Izuku wailed. Shut up. Katsuki boomed. All Might really. And Kaken and we've been training together forever. Izuku cried, ignoring that the hero seemed to have already made up his mind. His voice dropped to a murmur as he began to mumble, well, I trained a lot on my own because our quirks are so different, but we work together too. Though I'm sure Kaken would have also trained on his own, so it doesn't really matter. Young Midoriya, I understand. Bakugo has much potential as well, though I'm not sure my guidance will help him all that much, but I can certainly train you two together. Really? Izuku asked. Yes, but I'll have to change up my plans a bit, All Might replied as the gears in his head began turning. It'll work though. The pro stayed true to his word. On that initial day of training he laid the groundwork for what the pair would be doing for the next 10 months before the entrance exam for UA. He gave them a strict diet and exercise regimen to go along with whatever training they'd be doing at the beach. However, to start out, All Might made a shocking announcement. First, you boys will be clearing a half-mile stretch of this beach, All Might proudly declared. You call this place a beach? It's a effing dumpster heap. Katsuki roared. How is picking up trash going to even help us train? Izuku asked, perplexed. I'm glad you asked. Primarily, it's an act of service to your community. Every hero should have a strong sense of morality and servitude towards their fellow man. So what? Katsuki grumbled. Having a few service hours under our belt isn't gonna help us get into UA. Well, that's not all. Moving all this waste will use muscles you didn't even know you had, and it will help get your bodies into peak condition before the real training begins. All Might beamed at the two before him. Katsuki groaned and glared at Izuku. How did you rope me into this? What? Izuku yelled in mock anger. You insisted on joining me. The other just growled at his counterpart and listened to All Might blabber on about being an upstanding citizen or something of that nature. The boys were quick to realize just how true All Might's statement had been. Even though they'd been training for years, after the first day on that beach both boys were beyond sore and exhausted. Most of their individual training had been quirk-related or just going for runs or lifting a few weights. This training required them to use their entire bodies. Granted, it probably would have been much more difficult for the average student at their school. It was taxing and even had Izuku loudly complaining when normally he'd be far too anxious to ever berate a training regimen put together by the one and only All Might. Katsuki even evaluated how much he actually wanted the pros' help, but quickly decided that giving up was absolutely out of the question. Training at UA would be 10 times as difficult, and they'd be surrounded by people who excelled at it. He would push through this now and reign supreme. The diet was the one saving grace. It was packed with protein and carbs to help sustain their strenuous workouts, but was also insanely healthy and left them feeling refreshed and ready to tackle their assignments. Although Mitsuki wasn't fond of it whatsoever, it was more work on her, and eventually she decided that if Katsuki was going to ask this of her, the least he could do was help out. So on top of his schoolwork, beach training, and individual workouts, he was also helping with every meal at home. He didn't complain much though, and when he did, it was about the hag's nagging or Izuku's incessant muttering. Inko on the other hand was more than happy to help out her growing boy and usually made enough food for Katsuki too, which lessened the workload for the busy teen. All Might kept tabs on their work too, but until the beach was finished it was just the occasional checkup to make sure they were hard at work. To the pros' surprise, they made very quick work of the beach. They'd cleared more than he even assigned within a month and a half and were raring to move on to the next step. This was probably due to the fact that Katsuki had taken to just blowing up everything that wasn't salvageable or recyclable, and Izuku used his quirk, although sparingly, to demolish larger pieces of furniture and whatever else was just impossible to lift for someone his size to make it easier to transport. To be frank, the hero was impressed. He had expected it to take them at least 3 months if not more. But they'd easily cut that time in half without burning out. The next step was to introduce offensive strategies to Izuku and defensive strategies to Katsuki. The loud and aggressive blonde excelled at punching anything into SBMs, and if his quick tongue and snarky remarks weren't enough to do the job, but there were holes in his defense. On the other hand, Izuku was exceptionally skilled at putting up walls. Literally. He had no trouble fending off attacks with his insane quirk, but he lacked the experience when it came to being on offense. In addition, both boys could work on stamina. On top of this observation though, All Might was quick to realize that both boys were incredibly intelligent. Once told of an adjustment they needed to make, it was immediately implemented, and they very rarely had to be reminded. When All Might pointed out Katsuki's heavy reliance on his strong right hook that was easily anticipated, the boy found ways to lessen his habit. He integrated other moves and even found ways to utilize that weakness to his advantage in order to get the upper hand once his opponent, usually Izuku, got used to it by feinting a right hook and then coming in with an entirely new attack. When All Might pointed out how Izuku had the tendency to mimic the pro's fist-based fighting style instead of using the entire other and arguably more powerful side of his quirk, Izuku instantly altered his style. He incorporated his matter into his attacks and found that long-range fighting was actually much easier for him. Keeping his opponent at a distance and then capturing them using his quirk was more his forte, although he still insisted on learning to defend and attack close range too. The boys were quick learners, mastering the basics of offense and defense in record time from what All Might had seen. Katsuki was eager to grow his explosions and have more effective ranged attacks like Izuku, and Izuku was finding it easier and easier to use his quirk for longer PRDS of time. Although it seemed the repercussions were still as intense as ever, as there was more than one occasion that the drained and deflated hero found himself carrying a passed-out Midoriya to the Bakugu residence at Katsuki's request. According to him, if Izuku showed up home looking like that, his mother would drop dead, and then we'd have 2 green-haired bodies on our hands. The pro found himself growing fond of the boys. He even got used to Katsuki's explosive anger, no pun intended, and absolutely filthy language, and Izuku's tendency to break down in tears at the drop of a hat. It was endearing, although it probably took Katsuki about 5 times as long as Izuku to actually trust the pro. Undoing the damage he'd done upon meeting the green-haired boy was no easy task. Every mistake the boy made seemed to be grounds for his failure as a hero, even when All Might assured him it was not. Every misstep the loss of some imaginary civilian's life, every failed attempt at a new move the death of his best friend, and every moment of success a fluke that would be impossible to recreate. Katsuki seemed accustomed to this repetitive cycle of self-depreciation and anxiety, but it was a shock to All Might when he first witnessed Izuku begin to spiral. The trigger hadn't even been anything huge. All Might had simply pointed out that, had they been in a residential area, the attack he had used could have potentially injured a bystander. It had been a reckless move, although successful, involving a tidal of choppy, rough matter that encased and entangled Katsuki, with whom he'd been sparring. It just needed some fine-tuning but was otherwise an effective strategy, but the comment had launched Izuku into a frenzy. His face drained of color and his mind seemed to race a mile a minute before tears burst from his eyes, and he lost his composure. He trailed off as panic flooded his system. His hands trembled, and he stood completely absorbed in his racing mind, seeming no longer aware of his surroundings. Why would you say that? Katsuki yelled as he was released from Izuku's hold and rushed to the gasping, distraught boy. His voice immediately softened as he approached Izuku. He didn't realize. He reached out a hand and gently placed it on the other's shoulder, but this was obviously the wrong choice because the panicking teen collapsed on the ground and wrapped his arms tightly around his knees. Katsuki dropped to his level and began murmuring something to the other. Apparently the frantic boy had understood because he hesitantly nodded, and his eyes flickered to all might before locking onto Katsuki's shoes. Are you actually a fing idiot? Katsuki growled, albeit slightly quieter than his usual tone. I don't dash. You don't even remember what you said, do you? Or what he told you? Katsuki raged as he stood from his crouched position beside Izuku. What he dash? On the roof, you effing a hole. A tentative hand latched onto Katsuki's pant leg and gave a small tug. You told him he couldn't be a hero because he'd end up injuring the heroes or people around him who needed help. You told him that the people who'd called him a villain his entire FNG life, the grip tightened a moment, were probably right in their assessment of his quirk. And then you left him on a roof alone. Confusion flashed across the pro's face. I thought we'd moved past that. Yeah, maybe you did, but you're not the one he calls every other night panicking like this because you kinda looked at him differently, and maybe that meant you'd realized you were right the first time, and you were finally done wasting time on him. He quickly glanced at Izuku and muttered, which isn't true for the record. I had no idea he was still hung up on this, All Might said, still very much lost. You say that like you aren't his FANG idol who told him his bullies were right for all those years. That isn't what I meant dash. No, of course not, Katsuki sneered. FING whatever. I don't have the time or the patience to make you understand. He dropped back down to Izuku's side, demeanor immediately shifting to calm comfort. He raised a hesitant hand back to Izuku's shoulder, but the boy aggressively flinched away. All Might watched in awe as Katsuki coaxed Izuku slowly out of his panic daze, and in shock when he allowed Izuku to bury his head in his shoulder. After a minute or two he seemed to be calming down, and Katsuki muttered something inaudible into the other's ear, and immediately his shoulders began to shake as sobs racked his body. What did you say? All Might exclaimed horrified. He was just calming down. Katsuki rolled his eyes and tissed at the adult. One would think by this age he'd have dealt with a panic attack or two. Then again, everyone was different. He wanted to know if you were still here, Katsuki replied begrudgingly. Aye. Am I supposed to leave? He asked frantically. It doesn't matter now. But you're certainly not helping, Katsuki mumbled the last part, almost too quiet for the hero to hear. I can go, All Might offered, unsure what else to say. Sure, Katsuki replied after a beat. Just, tell my dad to come pick us up in like an hour, he added as the pro turned to leave. Why your dad? Yeah, he should be at home from work now, Katsuki answered as he began to pry Izuku off of him. Okay, All Might conceded as he left the two teens on the beach. Their training session had been nearly over anyway. From that day forward, All Might was extremely careful not to mention or say anything remotely similar to the day on the roof, but it was hard. A few panic attacks later, and he even knew what to do to stop one before it escalated like the first time. He grew to care for the boys. Months dragged on, but also flew by like a montage in a sports movie. He developed their talents as best he could and learned he probably wasn't the best man for this job after several corrections from Katsuki and even a few muttered tips from Izuku. Soon they'd far surpassed the goals he'd set for them, perhaps with the exception of Izuku's stamina. However, that took time and careful conditioning that UA could help nurture and correct. That seemed to be the type of issue that a hero course would easily take care of, so the pro let it go. With only 2 weeks left before the entrance exam, All Might was forced to decide who he was recommending. Both teens could easily cut it in the regular entrance exam and would have a spectacular shot in the recommendation exam. He'd already banked on recommending Izuku, but Katsuki had almost surpassed his original choice in terms of sheer growth over the months. Both had come leaps and bounds, but you'd be hard-pressed to find a middle schooler as qualified as Katsuki Bakugo for a hero course. So he proposed the option to the duo. "I could recommend you both," All Might announced one evening after training. "You're both overqualified, extremely hard workers, talented, brimming with potential, and you could make the cut in the recommendation exam." Izuku's eyes sparkled with unshed tears after hearing his idol's statement. He fiercely nodded and looked over to his best friend. "No," Katsuki's face was like stone. No emotion reached his eyes. But Kaken, we've been working all these months." Izuku protested. "No. You're gonna recommend Izuku, but that's it," Katsuki restated, ignoring Izuku's hurt expression. "This isn't about not thinking I've earned it. I know goddamn well I could even destroy every single kid in that exam. But you said you'd recommend Izuku. So fing do it. I'm gonna be the #1 applicant in the whole exam, and people will wish they'd worked as hard as me. I don't need any more extra help getting into UA, the rest is on me." He turned on his heel and stalked away from the beach, leaving Izuku and All Might in a state of disbelief. That was just like Katsuki. "Well, Midoriya, it looks like you'll be my only recommendation this year," All Might finally declared with a chuckle. "Oh, thank you so much, All Might. I don't know how I'm ever gonna repay you." Izuku replied with glee. "Repay me by getting into your dream school and becoming a hero." "Okay, All Might." The recommendation exam for UA took place the day before the regular entrance exams so that the school had adequate proctors for each exam. Katsuki accompanied Izuku and All Might on the trip to UA, and decided he would just go grab something to eat while Izuku took his exam and then meet him back at the school whenever it was over to hear all about it. Izuku had to first take a written exam, then the practical, and lastly an interview with one of the school teachers, though who that would be, Izuku had no idea. He was certain he'd be ready for any written exam. All Might had given them study materials and a brief overview of topics to focus on when studying, including hero laws, registration regulations, property damage codes, and a multitude of other topics on top of core subjects like math, English, science, and history. He'd always been in the top positions of his classes with Katsuki, so schoolwork was one area where confidence wasn't the main issue. The practical exam and interview were what really scared him. Training with All Might had allowed him to grow exponentially in his abilities and strength, but a little voice in the back of his head seemed to constantly be whispering that it might not be enough for whatever was coming. He had no idea who would be at this exam. They could be the children of pros for all he knew. And on top of that, he was completely unprepared for an interview. He had no idea what they'd ask him about. Maybe about whatever training he'd done or about his quirk. He could answer that, but what if they asked something he didn't know the answer to? It was a complete mystery, and Izuku did not like being unprepared for events like this. He wanted a plan. However, All Might told him nothing to prep him for that section of the recommendation exam. So instead, Izuku just tried to not pass out from anxiety on the trip to UA. Katsuki would be with him as soon as it was over, so he tried to calm himself down. When Izuku entered the exam site, he was blown away. There were probably at least 50 kids his age already there, seated for the introduction before the written exam. He was given a number by a woman who looked like she knew what she was doing and instructed to take a seat wherever there was space. He pinned his number, 52, onto his jacket, and looked around the room, checking out his opponents and trying to find the safest seat. Not many applicants really stood out. Most of them looked just as terrified to be there as him, if not more. Maybe they came from more prestigious middle schools and were recommended for grades or something. He had no idea. But a select amount of the candidates were hard not to stare at, especially for someone like Izuku, who had spent the better half of his childhood chasing after pros and analyzing everyone with a quirk that he found interesting. He didn't like to brag about it, but it was easy to tell who was hero material, especially in a setting like this one. One boy with a shaved head, number 41, was talking loudly with his neighbors and waving excitedly at everyone who entered, occasionally getting up to introduce himself. He seemed extremely outgoing and kind, but that could mean he was just extremely calm and confident in his abilities. On the other end of the spectrum, a boy with dual-colored red and white hair, number 23, was sitting in the front row alone. Everyone seemed to avoid him, even 41, and he radiated a dark aura that gave Izuku the chills. He seemed annoyed by everyone around him, from the anxious kids to the overly confident ones who leaned back in their chairs, smugly analyzing their competition. There was also a girl there with a high ponytail who seemed very nervous. She was scantily dressed to Izuku's surprise. Maybe her quirk required her to use her skin like the pro Midnight. Whatever the case, she seemed nice to Izuku, so he took a seat beside her and shot her a supportive grin. Hi, I'm Izuku Midoriya, he mumbled as he stuck a hand out to introduce himself. Momo Yaoyorozu, she answered quietly and shook his hand. Pleasure to meet you. Why yeah, you too, he replied quickly. Do you know when we'll begin? No, she answered as she fiddled with the hem of her jacket that covered a cropped shirt. I was one of the first to arrive, but they haven't said anything about when we'll begin. My assumption is that they're waiting for all the students whose applications were sent in to arrive. Oh, that makes sense, Izuku said as he thought over her words. A few more applicants trickled in before the doors shut, and a man with slicked-up bright blonde hair entered the room and stood in front of the students. Izuku immediately recognized him as the voice hero, Present Mike, and stifled the urge to gasp and ask for his autograph. He was a well-known staff member of UA and radio host. Izuku should have expected him to host these exams with his oddly applicable quirk. All right, listeners. The hero called to get everyone's attention. I'm Present Mike, a teacher here at UA. I'll be instructing you today. Are you all hyped up? His fists pumped in the air as he excitedly tried to get a reaction out of the applicants. No one answered. Tough crowd. But let's get right into it. First up is your written exam. Everyone, grab the supplies as they are distributed by our lovely assistants, and you may begin when you're ready. Cheating is absolutely prohibited, and if you're caught, you'll be removed from the exam. So keep your eyes on your own paper, kids. Any questions? Instantly, Yaoyorozu's hand shot into the air. How long do we have to take the exam? I'm glad you asked. You all have 2 hours to finish your test, but I'm sure you won't need that long. Take your time. The real test begins later. Mike shouted. No more students had questions, so the voice hero wished them luck and took a seat near the front of the room. Izuku received his test soon after and immediately began. None of it was too challenging and he was on a roll. A few questions really made him think, especially the more moral-based questions about what the right decision in certain difficult scenarios would be, but he wasn't having too much trouble. Even the math was pretty simple stuff. Still, he could tell a few students were really struggling as they stared at their tests in confusion, but he tried to ignore them as best he could. What he was not prepared for was Yaoyorozu standing up 45 minutes into the test and walking confidently up to present Mike, who'd been dozing off, and asking where to turn in her test. They'd been given 2 hours for a reason. Izuku was only about 2/3 through his test, which he'd been extremely confident in. As Yaoyorozu was guided to the next site by a proctor, Izuku realized this was the caliber he was up against. It terrified him. At the hour mark, a few more students began turning in tests, though not many, and the vast majority seemed hard at work. Among those done were 41 and 23 from earlier. They actually finished second and third and were guided away together, which seemed to annoy the dual-toned boy to no end. Izuku finished with 45 minutes to spare and quietly handed in his test, followed by a very pale boy wearing a number 16 who introduced himself as Juzo Hananuki. He seemed kind enough, but he hadn't really caught Izuku's eye all that much. The next site seemed to be outside. About 10 contestants were lined up at what appeared to be a starting line. The practical exam would be a race. Just perfect. What if one of these kids had a rare teleportation quirk or a speed quirk like the Pro Ingenium? Izuku took a spot amongst the applicants and prepared himself for whatever could be next. After 2 more students arrived, Present Mike burst outside. All right. Our top 15 test takers. Who's ready to get racing? He hollered in excitement. No one replied to the pro's disappointment. He brushed it off quickly though. Okay, since you 15 finished up our written exam first, we're gonna have all of you take the practical exam in its first heat. Theoretically this way, we stagger the race enough that everyone is within their same skill set, and so we don't have 50 applicants trying to race together. You'll be racing in a 3-kilometer obstacle course. Are you all ready? Again, no one answered. He quickly explained the course to give everyone an idea of what to expect and where to go, and then asked again if they were ready to begin. Crickets. You really are a tough crowd? Well, the practical exam begins now. Present Mike called as he clicked a button on a stopwatch from the sidelines and took a clipboard from an assistant beside him. No one moved for a second, and then Izuku just shot forward. He wasn't taking any chances today, and the timer had started. There aren't countdowns in real hero work. Get going, the pro yelled, seeing everyone's hesitation. Then all hell broke loose. The dual-toned boy, 23, shot past Izuku on an enormous wave of ice, and the bald go-getter, 41, swiftly surpassed him and seemed to be flying. Izuku wasn't having it, so mimicking 23's strategy, he manifested a wave of dark matter that surged forward, soon catching up with the other two. This seemed to tick off 23 a bit too much, and he shot forward with a boost of power, successfully taking the first-place position. Izuku quickly realized how futile this strategy was. Riding a wave of his dark matter was just draining unnecessary energy, so he looked around quickly. The first obstacle was approaching, and it appeared to be some sort of maze. Large walls obstructed their view of whatever was ahead. Normally, they'd be forced to weave around and find their way through, adding precious minutes to their times. However, luckily for Izuku, he could just fly over the course using his quirk. The other two seemed to have similar ideas, and 23 used his ice as a bridge over the blockade. Number 41 literally flew over. Whereas Izuku manifested a pole of sorts midway over the obstacle as far as his range allowed him at this point, and he used his matter to shoot forward and swing past quicker than the others as if he were using a grappling hook or web like Spider-Man. Finally having surpassed the others, Izuku decided to show off the other application of his quirk, and flooded his body with dark energy as All Might had taught him. He felt the power pumping through his limbs like electricity. It allowed him to speed up his steps and leap forward with almost as much force as he'd occasionally seen All Might do to avoid Katsuki's attacks when they sparred. Although, Izuku knew for a fact that wasn't All Might's top speed from his extensive research on the pro, but it felt good to be compared to the hero. He knew his body had turned an inky black as the energy distorted his skin tone, and Katsuki had even told him his hair had turned black and white the first time he'd done a full body transformation for training. His eyes would have lost all pigment and the areas around him would appear sapped of all energy or light. That was one of the side effects of playing with energy that he plucked out of literal nothing. It was crazy to see himself in the mirror the first time, and it really messed with his eyes, so he knew using the full body transformation was a visual deterrent for most of his competitors or future villains. To his shock though, both 23 and 41 just seemed exhilarated by his sudden move. They caught up to him quickly, and the three remained neck and neck throughout the rest of the course. They passed a pit with pillars and tight ropes with ease and flew past explosives and other obstacles in a flash. Izuku switched deftly between the applications of his quirk which wouldn't have ever been possible without All Might's training. They all pushed ahead, and none of their competitors ever came as close to the top spot. The three-way rivalry they had fostered in mere minutes only served to make them push harder. When the finish line came into sight along with Present Mike and his stopwatch, though Pro seemed almost startled to see anyone yet, and he quickly readied himself for their finale. Izuku gave a final push with his quirk, and the other two did as well as they all passed the finish line, 41 gliding ahead, and 23 surging forward in a last-ditch effort to take first place. All three boys were exhausted. Number 41 jumped up in excitement and started to congratulate both of the other boys, but 23 cut him off. "Coldly, you were in my way," he growled and stalked off. Ice crystallized over the right side of his body and his breath coming out in clouds of condensation. For one just watched him walk away in shock as the gleeful look that had been plastered on his face all day fell away. Izuku walked up to him carefully, about to comfort him, but the other just stormed off. Present Mike watched the interaction in confusion, and then shook his head as if literally shaking away the encounter he just witnessed. He congratulated Izuku on third place and revealed that all three of them had broken the record times for this particular course. Other applicants came flooding in after that, and Izuku quickly made his way back inside for that last portion of this entrance exam, the interview. Izuku waited patiently for his name to be called to go back for his interview. Applicant 23 was the only other one in the room, and Izuku assumed that 41 had been called back first because he finished first in the practical exam. 23 just glared furiously at the floor as he too waited for his turn. Eventually a woman came into the room with a clipboard and called, 23, Shuto Todoroki. The boy stood silently and followed her out, leaving Izuku stunned into silence. The boy with an ice quirk was the number 2 hero, Endeavor's son. The same Endeavor known across Japan and even the world for his immensely powerful flame quirk. It was incredibly ironic to Izuku, and he decided then if they somehow ended up in the same class, he would find out how in the world he managed to swing that one. More applicants flocked into the room as they finished the test. Izuku was pleased to see Yayorozu not too far behind the pack, so she must have placed well. Soon the woman returned and called out, 52, Izuku Midoriya. He followed her back to a small room with a lone chair set up before 2 teachers. At least Izuku assumed they were teachers. Hello, Midoriya. Congratulations on your excellent results in the practical exam. Wonderful application of your quirk, one of the teachers said as Izuku sat down. He watched Izuku carefully. I am the principal of UA, my name is Principal Nizu, and before you make any assumptions, you should know I am not a man with an animal quirk. I am an extremely rare case of an animal with an intelligence quirk. Izuku's eyes widened as he realized who was before him. Yes, it shocks most people. No matter though. This is my assistant, but pay him no mind, I'll be conducting your interview. Okay, Izuku replied as he directed his full attention to the principal of UA. First of all, give me a brief overview of your quirk and its applications. I saw it in the practical exam as I always watch the first few applicants, but if there's anything else you didn't show off, now is the time to let me know. Okay, well, my quirk is called Abyss, and it is basically the ability to manipulate both dark energy and dark matter. I can use it to form anything I want. It is effective at capturing or attacking long range. Also, because of the nature of dark matter, if you're unfamiliar, it behaves like a black hole or like matter made of nothing, so it absorbs attacks like explosions or any energy-based attack, things that aren't solid. Additionally, I can fight close range by condensing dark energy into my body. It behaves like a power-up quirk in most aspects, although it distorts my appearance making my skin and hair turn an inky black, Izuku rambled. Interesting. Well, that is certainly useful. Any drawbacks or hindrances it poses? Nizu asked. It drains my stamina very quickly, although I've been training and that seems to be something that endurance training will help with. Izuku started and then thought for a moment. When I use the dark energy in my body, it leaves my limbs feeling numb, like pins and needles, and the dark matter does have a bit of a range limit to how far I can use it, but again, with training I guarantee I could widen that range. Very good, those aren't uncommon drawbacks for long-range quirks, Nizu commented before moving on. Alright, what kind of training have you received so far, if any? Well, beginning about 10 months ago, All Might began training my friend Kaken and I. At that, Nizu perked up quickly. Oh? I knew he recommended you, but I wasn't sure why. Who is this, Kaken? Is he here today? Oh, I just call him Kaken because we've known each other since we were kids. His real name is Katsuki Bakugu. He isn't here even though All Might offered to recommend him too. He said he didn't want any more help getting into UA, so he'll be at the regular entrance exam tomorrow, Izuku explained. I see, Nizu replied. Moving on, what was your middle school experience like? Grades, any extracurriculars, clubs, anything you deem relevant? Oh, Izuku began, visibly uneasy with the question. Well, I'm usually at the top of my class with Kaken for grades, but I didn't really do any clubs or extra things outside of class through school. I spent my time with Kaken training my quirk or analyzing heroes. I see, you mentioned hero analysis. Do you have a talent for that? Or have you considered a career in quirk analysis? Nizu asked out of curiosity. Izuku sheepishly rubbed the back of his neck before replying, well, I've been studying and analyzing quirks as long as I can remember, but I never really thought of going into it as a career. I only did it so that I could learn new strategies for whenever I hopefully became a hero. I wanted to be prepared because my quirk manifested very late. I was 7 before it appeared. I don't really know if I'd say I'm talented at it, but I've filled 14 journals so far with analysis of the quirks of most pros or other people around me whose quirks I find interesting. It's just a fun hobby for me. You do it for fun? Nizu asked in shock. Yes, Izuku stammered. Most people find analysis extremely boring and monotonous. The people who chose it as a career are normally fanatics or incredibly focused and productive, Nizu noted. It's a breath of fresh air to find someone who enjoys it like me. Really? Izuku gasped. Oh yes, though I don't write mine down, but we should discuss this further sometime. For now though I just have a few more questions. Izuku nodded harshly in response before answering the rest of Nizu's questions, most of which were just standard interview questions and formalities. They quickly wrapped up the interview, and Izuku was free to leave. He rushed to the front of the building and texted Katsuki that the test was finally over. Yennard, I know. A few kids left a while ago, so I figured you'd be out soon, Katsuki said as Izuku stepped through the front door, nose buried in his phone and awaiting Katsuki's response. Oh my god, Kaken! Izuku gasped. You're gonna give me a heart attack, he yelled as he clutched his chest for effect. Quit being a baby. Let's go, Katsuki replied as he rolled his eyes. How was the exam? Izuku's eyes lit up at Katsuki's question, and he began to radiate excitement. I came in 3rd in the practical exam. And all 3 of us broke record times for the course. Course? The practical exam was a race. Katsuki asked, but excitement at his friend's news seeped into his voice. Yeah. And did you hear me? I came in 3rd, Kaken. I heard you. Katsuki confirmed with a chuckle as he draped an arm around Izuku's shoulder. Congrats. There's no way you won't get in now. I hope so. Now all you have to do is crush the regular entrance exam and hopefully we'll be in the same class. Izuku reasoned. Demon right. They won't know what hit them. Katsuki growled as his eyes glinted and muscles tensed. Tomorrow would be a breeze. Katsuki and Izuku made their way back to the Midoriya household to share the good news with Izuku's mom. When they opened the door, they were almost instantly enveloped in a warm, bone-crushing hug from Inko. Mom. You're gonna suffocate us. Izuku yelped from the clutches of his mother. Oh, sorry, sweetie, she replied as she released the 2 boys. I'm just excited. How did your exam go? It actually went pretty well, Izuku answered sheepishly. Pretty well? Katsuki scoffed. He came in 3rd in the practical exam and broke school records, he added. You did? Inko cried, tears welling in her eyes. Oh, my baby is growing up. I'm so proud. Her arms were back around her son in seconds. Okay, Mom. Why don't you let us get inside already? Izuku said as he tentatively hugged his mother back. Of course. I've already got some stuff thawing for dinner, so it won't be too long. I'm making your favorite, katsudon. Inko said as she guided the boys into their home. Can Kaken stay? Izuku asked, giving Katsuki a grin. I shouldn't. I have to be up early to get to UA in time for the entrance exam, and I know you'll keep me up all night because you never shut up, Katsuki cut in before Inko could answer. He gave Izuku a knowing look. Well, if you do decide to stay, there'll be plenty of food, sweetie. And I can get you boys up on my way to work in the morning if you'd like. I was also planning on making a big breakfast tomorrow regardless, Inko replied, a knowing grin sliding onto her face. I dunno. Only if you promise to go to bed before 9 o'clock, he said as he rounded on Izuku. His friend notoriously stayed up until ungodly hours every night, and Katsuki was not going to deal with that the day before his exam. 10 o'clock, and you have a deal, Izuku offered quickly. Katsuki rolled his eyes before glancing at a clock. It was already 5, fine nerd. Izuku grinned from ear to ear before dragging Katsuki to his room. Dinner will be ready soon. Inko warned as they dashed off. She doubted they'd even hurt her, but it wasn't a big deal. After letting Mitsuki know her son would be staying over, she returned to making dinner, a smile as bright as any star plastered on her face. Katsuki awoke to Inko flicking on the light of Izuku's room the next morning, illuminating Izuku's many posters and figurines of All Might that covered the walls and occupied every open surface. He rolled over, shoving Izuku before burying his face in a pillow. "What?" Izuku groaned groggily. "Time to get up," Katsuki replied. Izuku had obviously broken their agreement the night before even after the other passed out at 10:15, 15 minutes past the original time. "It's not my fault you stayed up all night doing God knows what." Izuku groaned and sat up slowly. "I was asleep before it hit 2 a.m., he retorted indignantly. Katsuki's head shot up from the pillow. "You stayed up until 2 a.m.? "No. I said I was asleep before 2 a.m. The last time I checked, it was like 1:30-ish, Izuku clarified as he rubbed at his eyes. "You are gonna pass the F out today," Katsuki growled as he kicked the covers off and sat up beside Izuku. He glanced at the other who was sporting an impressive case of bedhead before punching Izuku in the shoulder. "Oh, what was that for?" Izuku shouted as he reeled back from Katsuki's still-raised fist. "To wake you up. Now we get ready because the entrance exam starts in 3 hours, and I still need to eat all your mom's cooking and run home first because you're unprepared but didn't think ahead to have me grab clothes for today." Izuku grumbled loudly but still quickly tugged on a semi-acceptable outfit and joined the other for breakfast. Though the meal was quick, and soon Katsuki was rushing out the door shouting something about how on time is late. Izuku just mumbled something about seeing him after the exam and promptly collapsed onto the table, exhausted. Katsuki approached the looming gates of UA that were swarmed with hopeful kids just like him. He couldn't help but analyze everyone he saw around him, from the boisterous, pink-skinned girl who clung to a downcast black-haired boy to the excited girl whose brown hair and plain clothes allowed her to easily blend with the crowd. He even picked out a buff but nerdy-looking boy who seemed to be trying to organize all the students nearest him. This was sure to be an interesting test. However, Katsuki just glared at the ground and marched past everyone, making sure to scare off anyone who got too close to him. The introduction to the exam was uneventful, and the written exam flew by in a flash. Although a few kids actually got up and left upon seeing the test. A loud blonde boy with an ungodly haircut in the back row almost cried when he saw it, but Katsuki assumed he got over it. Then the announcer, Present Mike, made some lame jokes and attempted to excite the crowd of young hopefuls, and the buff nerd from before yelled at some kid behind him before asking a few questions about the rules for the practical exam. It seemed simple enough to Katsuki: blow up as many robots as you can and ignore the 0-point ones. Finally, they were split into groups and sent to their respective exam sites, and Katsuki was pleased to see that the buff nerd wasn't at his site. None of the kids he'd noticed earlier were there actually. It was a relief because he could just tell they were the type to attract drama, and he was not in the mood. Izuku had done so well in the recommendation exam, and it left Katsuki with high expectations for himself in the regular entrance exam. He would crush anyone he came across and come out on top. Hell, as far as he knew, no one else at this exam had been training with the #1 hero all summer. They never stood a chance. Having heard all about the start of Izuku's practical exam, Katsuki did not hesitate to rush into the city arena as soon as the door opened. He figured they'd tell him if he was supposed to wait, but no one stopped him. It was a full 30 seconds before anyone even joined him in the exam site, and by then he'd already leapt at the first robot he saw, effectively scoring the first points of the exam. He lunged at every robot in sight, sending explosion after explosion. 1-pointers and 2-pointers fell to the ground around him, and 3-pointers were absolutely decimated. His forearms and palms burned, but it was nothing compared to some of his training with All Might, so he just pushed through the pain. Minutes passed in slow motion as he relentlessly scored points. He lost count long before the 10-minute mark, but his attention was quickly drawn from his calculations as the ground rumbled under his feet. He glanced up for a moment to see an enormous robot towering over the buildings around him, the 0-pointer they were to ignore. His fellow test-takers screamed and ran in every direction except towards the new threat. It was like the scene in Ratatouille when the humans come into the kitchen. Everyone ran in different directions. It was chaos, but Katsuki just grinned to himself. If that beast came near him, he'd just melt its face off, but the disarray gave him the perfect opportunity to steal all the points the idiots around him had abandoned. He just kept his distance and continued to destroy the honestly annoying bots around him. Time had just about run out when he heard screams coming from the 0-point behemoth. He rolled his eyes in annoyance. These idiots really wanted to die, didn't they? They were supposed to ignore it for a reason. Grumbling to himself, he sprinted off, clearing a path before him. They only had a minute and a half left anyway, and by his most modest estimate he'd scored at least 50 points, which had to be worth something. It was probably closer to 70. When he turned the corner to the road the 0-point robot was on, he gasped at the sight before him. 3 absolute morons were stood near the base of the giant trying to lift something. He sprinted over to them shouting for them to just effing move, and gladly they did. His eyes widened at what he saw, and he silently cursed, wishing he had Izuku's quirk for just a moment. There was a 4th moron buried beneath huge pieces of rubble and bleeding from her temple, and the 0-point titan of a robot was approaching at a concerning and surprising speed. "What the F were you morons thinking?" he yelled as he tried to see if he could just blow up the rubble to free her. "We figured more robots might have been released with the big one, so we wanted to just pick them off quickly and then get out of here, but then it hit the side of the building and she got trapped, and we can't lift the slab she's under," one of the more frantic morons rambled quickly, shaking like a leaf. Present Mike announced 30 seconds left across the entire arena, and Katsuki groaned, looking up at the 0-pointer that was no more than 20 meters away by now. "You idiots!" He leapt away from the group towards the Titan. "Try to get her out of here," he shouted before gritting his teeth and shouting to the huge robot, "Hey, tin can! Over here!" He sent sparks flying from his palms before rocketing up to the beast's shoulders. He frowned before mumbling. He raised an open palm and swung it as hard and fast as he could at what seemed to be the neck of the robot. The explosion sent him flying back, but left a gaping hole in the Titan's metal shell. Quickly recovering midair, he sent an explosion behind him to return him to his position on the robot. Wires and shrapnel were left singed and exposed, so without giving it much thought, he plunged a searing hand into the hole and ripped as many wires as he could find out of the mess before him. The giant spluttered for a moment before continuing forward, unfazed. He looked down to see the morons finally dragging their friend from her prison, and sighed in relief. Realizing time must have been up by that point, he sent a final explosion to the robot's neck, effectively stopping it dead in its tracks and hurling him from the side. He softened his landing with a final explosion and crudely landed on the ground with a gruesome thud but seemed to be unharmed by the fall. A buzzer announced the end of the exam, and Katsuki trudged back to the entrance where a number of examinees were being healed by UA's nurse. She was kind of famous and was the only reason UA got away with a lot of the things they put their students through, including this exam. As soon as he came into view, she rushed over to him followed by who he assumed to be a teacher or assistant or something. "Are you injured at all, sweetie? You were the last to get back," she asked, glancing him over quickly. "I'm fine," he growled before shoving past her and beelining for the exit. "Ah, everyone gets a kiss regardless, just to be sure," she called. She pulled him down to her level and planted a loud smooch on his forehead. Fatigue hit him like a wave, but any pain in his palms and forearms dissipated in an instant, and a look of relief washed over his face. It was quickly replaced by a glare though as he quietly thanked her and marched from the exam site. He barely made it home before collapsing on his couch. Reluctantly, he pulled his phone free from his pocket and texted Izuku that he was home before his eyes crashed shut, and he fell into a much-needed sleep. Curse that nurse's quirk. Katsuki and Izuku received their acceptance letters on the same day, which was probably for the best because both would have most likely keeled over from anxiety had the other been accepted first. Their parents made a huge fuss over it as they usually did with any achievements, and that night both the Midoriyas and Bakugas got together for a celebratory dinner. All Might, of course, already knew they'd been accepted because as he revealed in their letters that he would be teaching at UA the upcoming year. The only people they had left to tell were any other friends from school, but that wasn't an issue. Instead, they hung out together almost every single day over the rest of the summer, staying in shape and further honing their quirks to get ready to blow any competition out of the water come August. It was relatively uneventful preparation. They bought school supplies as one does every year, and for the occasion new backpacks and uniforms. Izuku's mom nearly cried when her son finally tried on his new uniform, but that was to be expected. Although Katsuki's reaction was much different, seeing as he almost died of laughter upon seeing Izuku's failed attempt at tying a tie. To be fair, it was pretty hilarious, but it just caused Izuku to panic and try to retie it about 20 times, failing more and more each time. This too was absolutely laughable. 2 days before their first day, Izuku slept over at Katsuki's, and by midnight it had finally hit the green-haired insomniac that he was going to UA. Kaken, are you awake? Izuku muttered, already knowing the answer to that question. Yeah, the other groaned, you're thinking so loud that I can't fall asleep, thanks. Izuku rolled over where he lay beside his friend to face away from him. Sorry. Just spit it out or else you'll never fall asleep, and then you won't be able to sleep tomorrow either, and then you'll sleep through your first day at UA, and I'll have to listen to you cry about that and whatever's bothering you now. So just go. I'm listening, Katsuki growled as he stared at the ceiling. Well, he thought for a moment before blurting, I'm just anxious because what if the kids at UA are the same as the kids in middle school? Katsuki turned his head to Izuku, who was now staring right back at him. He could just barely make out how the other was worrying at his lip, and his eyes blinked rapidly as if holding back tears. They won't be, Katsuki stated matter-of-factly. But every single person at that school and in our class is someone who wants to become a hero, and they're serious enough about it that they worked their butts off to get into the best school for it around. And all the teachers there will know that, and they'll know that you especially deserve to be there and are giving everything to be a hero because you got in on recommendation. People don't f with that, okay? Katsuki finished with a huff before meeting Izuku's eyes again. Izuku had quit worrying at his lip and was looking at Katsuki with big eyes. He paused for a moment before replying, That's probably the only time you've said something that actually made complete sense to me. Are you kidding me? Katsuki grumbled. Not like that, like, my brain always thinks of all these ways everything could go wrong, and then you tell me how ridiculous it is and it makes me feel better until I get the chance to think of about 20 or even 100 more ways that you could be wrong. But that actually makes sense, Izuku stammered quickly. Well, good, because I was serious. The people there are there to have a career saving people's lives. They don't have the luxury of bullying someone because that person is stronger than them, Katsuki added. Okay, Izuku muttered. You good now? Katsuki asked. Just, do you think that should I, or we, or not? You don't have to at all, I just mean, anyways. You know what I mean. Should I make it not a secret that that I'm gay? Izuku looked up at Katsuki expectantly. That was a train wreck, Katsuki noted dully. But aside from that, I suppose it depends if you want to take the backlash that will come if the public and the press find out about it. You think there'd be backlash? Izuku asked contemplatively. You are surprisingly optimistic at the strangest times. There's always going to be backlash if you're different, but if you think you could remember that their opinions are bullshit and that the people who actually care about and love you will accept you, then I'd say you'd be fine. Plus, how are you ever going to date if no one knows? Katsuki answered. Izuku considered it for a minute before declaring, I think if someone asks or if someone else comes out, then I'll tell people, but I won't bring it up first. That's what I was gonna do. And also scare the shit out of any assholes who think it's okay to be homophobic around me, or around anyone for that matter, Katsuki added with a sinister grin on his face. Okay now. Yeah, I think I'll be able to sleep, Izuku answered quietly. Okay, good night, Izuku. Night, Kaken. The morning of their first day at UA, Katsuki met Izuku at the halfway point between their houses, and from there they both began the short walk to UA. When Izuku spotted Katsuki, he jogged over and mumbled something about nerves before leading the way. The other just glared after him for a moment before catching up. After that, their trek was relatively silent. They approached the gates wordlessly. Swiping the student IDs they'd been sent along with their acceptance letters, they entered. Students of all ages and courses roamed the grounds before the day began. Most of them were returning second and third years who were meeting up with friends after the summer. Any first years seemed to have already found their homeroom, so wasting no time, both boys found their way through the unfamiliar building to the room marked 1A. Kaken, Izuku began, fiddling with the straps of his backpack. Hey, we're here already. No time for worrying, Katsuki cut him off harshly. He pivoted away and pushed the door open, marching right in. Izuku hung at the entrance before hurrying forward before the door could close in his face. Immediately he was bombarded by a tall boy in glasses who seemed to have taken control of the classroom and was attempting, unsuccessfully Izuku thought, to corral Katsuki. Please just take your seat quietly. The taller boy begged, pinching the bridge of his nose before turning to Izuku. Hello, I'm Tenya Ida. Welcome to Class 1A. Take your assigned seat please, and get to know our fellow classmates. Izuku gawked at the boy he now knew to be Ida. Hi, I'm Izuku Midoriya. Pleasure to meet you. The pleasure's all mine. Now please take a seat as class will be soon to begin. Izuku shuffled away, ignoring the eyes following him and took the seat quickly behind Katsuki after glancing at the seating chart posted at the front of the room. Kaken. Ignore him. He was at the entrance exam. Total. The CK up and know-it-all. I'm surprised he's even in here considering the scene he made at the exam, Katsuki murmured, eyes straight ahead as he sat sideways in the desk he'd taken against the wall. Oh, all right, Izuku mumbled. He glanced around the room taking in everyone around him. The seats beside and behind him were still empty, but most of the seats besides those were occupied. A pink-skinned girl was leaning on one of the other students' desks. He was a particularly muscular guy with spiky red hair not unlike Katsuki's. However, they seemed to be the only ones to know each other aside from he and Katsuki. The only other students that stood out to him were two from the recommendation exam. Both Momo Yaozu and Shuto Todoroki sat in the back of the classroom. He cracked a grin and waved over to Momo, who gave him a polite nod before returning her attention to whatever she was doing. You know her? Katsuki asked, having witnessed the brief interaction. Somewhat. She was in the recommendation exam, and we talked a little. She finished her written test with over an hour to spare. Izuku explained, her name's Momo Yaozu. Oh. Anyone else in here from the recommendation exam? Only the guy with red and white hair beside her. Shuto Todoroki, Izuku replied. He finished the practical exam in second. Katsuki just grunted in response before facing the front. The last few students trickled into the classroom just before the bell rang signaling the start of class. However, one very key component seemed to still be missing, the teacher. A few kids began mumbling concerns, and Ida fidgeted in his chair with his eyes locked on the door. After a few minutes, the door eased open, revealing a ragged-looking man laying on the floor in a yellow sleeping bag. He stood up without a word and took a place at the front of the classroom. Briefly, he surveyed the students before groaning and rubbing a hand over his face. I see you all found your seats before class began. I'm Shoyuda Aizawa, your teacher. He reached into the sleeping bag he held at his side and pulled out a blue uniform. Put these on and meet me outside in 10 minutes. The students just stared back at him wordlessly. A few shifted uncomfortably in their seats at the awkward silence as the man turned to leave the room. He stopped in the doorway for a moment before calling over his shoulder, It's been 8 seconds since I gave you your instructions, and yet no one has moved. Time is precious, and real heroes don't waste it gawking at others. Go. With that he left, presumably to wait for them outside. I thought we had an assembly? The girl with bright pink skin asked no one in particular. I'm sure our teacher knows exactly what he's doing. We should follow instructions and do as we were told, Ida proclaimed as he shot up from his seat. With that the rest of the class began moving, and they all went to their respective locker rooms to change. When they finally found their way outside, Aizawa was waiting for them with his hands in his pockets and a disapproving look on his face. You will all seriously need to work on time management, he deadpanned. Now begins your first test. A Quirk assessment. Mutters of confusion filled the quiet that Aizawa had previously commanded before one girl with a brown bob spoke out. "But we're gonna miss the assembly," she cried. "You can't waste your time on pointless ceremonies if you want to make it as a pro. Here at UA, we don't follow a traditional curriculum. That means I can run my class however I want. All throughout your time in school you've been forced to take standardized tests, but you were never allowed to use your quirks in the physical exams. It's foolish to not allow those with power to excel where they can, but our country isn't ready for that talk." He paused, surveying the students' reactions. Most just seemed curious, and a few even looked excited. "You may think this is something to be excited about, but I can promise you that hero work is not just fun and games. Today you will participate in 8 physical tests, each designed to help me assess and apprehend the potential of you and your quirks. Whoever comes in last place will prove they have no potential and be expelled immediately." An uproar ran through the class. Shouts of disbelief and shock rang through the group. "It's our first day. You can't just send us home. What about people with less physical quirks? I mean, she's just invisible, but she still has potential. It's not fair." The same girl called out again. A few kids nodded in agreement, but Aizawa just shook his head. Life isn't fair and neither is hero work. Sometimes heroes with more specialized quirks like hers get stuck in less than ideal situations, but if she can't find a way to use her abilities creatively here to save herself from expulsion, then she has no potential for pro work. Thank you for making an example of your classmate. I suppose now we'll see why she made it into this course in the first place. The girl who'd spoken out stared at the ground sheepishly before muttering an apology and clamping her mouth shut permanently. Izuku just gawked. She had a point, but he couldn't really worry about anyone but himself right now. Katsuki would be fine in this test, and rationally he knew he'd be okay too, but panic still settled deep in his stomach. He glanced up at his friend to see the other grinning wildly. Of course, over all these years he'd never lost that drive and passion to be the best, even if Izuku had softened him up. Instead of bothering Katsuki, he just counted his breaths and tried to stop the shaking in his hands. The test began with a 50-meter dash. There were a few students with obvious advantages, like Ida, who had literal engines in his claves, or a boy with a laser coming from his abdomen named Aoyama. Others found creative ways to give themselves an advantage. When it was Izuku's turn, he was paired with Katsuki. The nervous wreck of a boy decided to do something similar to what he'd done in the entrance exam and flooded his legs with dark energy, allowing him to sprint ahead quickly. Luckily, his uniform covered the discoloration that came with his quirk, so no one knew about it just yet, and he sighed a breath of relief when he finished. He didn't even pay attention to his times and just moved on to the next test. The next test was grip strength, and he did something similar, earning him a higher score than in middle school at least. He made sure to turn away from his classmates when he did it. Aside from that, the only notable standout performances during that test were the boy who literally broke the device named Kirishima because his skin became as hard as rock and broke the plastic, and a boy with 6 arms named Shuji who managed to get over 500 kilograms of force behind his grip. Following was the standing long jump. Many of his classmates did well in this area. A few were able to just jump or find their way completely over the sand pit, and others had impressive jumps anyway. When it was his turn, Izuku paled. Tentatively he approached the pit. So far no one's quirk stood out much, and almost everyone was too engrossed in their own progress to pay others any attention. However, Todoroki and a boy named Tokoyami with a shadow beast living in his body both were cause for stares and whispers. Anxiety pooled in his stomach as he debated trying to use dark energy to try jumping very far, or if he should use the matter to just lift himself over the pit of sand. "Midoriya, your classmates are waiting," Aizawa prodded in a monotone voice. "Oh, sorry," Izuku mumbled. Finally he decided risking expulsion wasn't worth hiding his quirk. They would find out eventually. With a deep breath, he allowed dark matter to pool around him, lifting his body with ease and quickly setting him down a good distance from the edge of the sand pit. He could hear gasps from his classmates, and a few students looked genuinely confused. "Excellent work," Aizawa muttered, writing down a note on his score sheet. Izuku just held his breath as he rejoined his eager and nervous classmates. One of the girls he'd seen before tentatively approached him. She hadn't really stood out much, but her scores did place her near the top of the class. "Excuse me. I'm Tsu, but you can call me Tsu," she offered from her bent position. A soft pink tongue peeked out from her mouth. "Hi, I'm Izuku Midoriya," he replied. "I just was wondering what your quirk even is. You seemed to have a pretty standard power-up quirk earlier, but that wasn't anything like any power-up quirk I've ever seen." At that point, Ida had overheard and joined the conversation too. "Indeed, your power is truly baffling. Originally, I'd hoped we'd have something in common with how you applied your quirk for speed, but now I'm not sure what you can do." He quickly readjusted his glasses and peered down at the smaller boy. "Oh." The tension in his shoulders seemed to dissipate at a question he could actually answer. "Well, it's called Abyss. Basically, it allows me to control both dark energy and dark matter," Izuku began. He glanced at their expressions and still seeing confusion he continued. "Essentially, I can concentrate dark energy in my body like a power-up quirk, and it lets me run faster, punch harder, jump higher. But the other half of my quirk lets me manipulate dark matter into whatever I want. I've used it to trap someone before or to move myself like just now, and I've played around a bit with throwing it or shooting it, but that's a bit harder." Both Tsu and Ida just stared back at him in shock before glancing at each other. "Wow, Midoriya. That's seriously amazing. My quirk is just called Frog. It's pretty cool, but I've never heard of anything even remotely similar to your quirk," she commented with a smile. "Absolutely. Your quirk sounds amazing. I'd be curious to hear about your parents' quirks," Ida added. "I can't fathom what you would need to mix to get your quirk." "It was a mutation," Izuku explained briefly before being cut off by Aizawa announcing they'd be moving on to the next test. The next few activities weren't very eventful: repeated sidesteps, sit-ups, and toe touch. They mostly showed flexibility and strength, and no one really stood out from the rest. Although a few girls were exceptionally flexible and a couple guys really cranked out their sit-ups, there wasn't really a way to shine. Izuku just coasted by, not even using his quirk much. Finally, the long-awaited ball throw was here, and all that was left was the long-distance run. Izuku didn't really have much advantage here in reality, but a few students were really pumped up, including Katsuki. Katsuki stepped up to the ring first, ready to blow the others away, literally. Izuku watched in earnest as his best friend pulled back his arm and let off an enormous explosion, sending the ball flying into the sky. Izuku's ears rang from the abnormally large blast, and a few kids covered their ears despite having heard the deafening blasts earlier. With a smirk, Katsuki returned to the group as Aizawa held up a small device for tracking the ball that read 705.3 meters. "Whoa dude, over 700 meters. That's insane." A very energetic blonde boy yelled as he pumped a fist into the air and congratulated Katsuki. Izuku was fairly sure he'd mentioned his name earlier, but it escaped him at the moment as he approached to commend his friend too. "Yeah, Kaken, that was insane," Izuku added. "Totally manly." Another hooped as he slung an arm around Katsuki's shoulders. "Get off, shitty hair." Katsuki growled, a tensed palm raised. "Hey dude, the name's Kirishima," said boy replied with a frown. Katsuki just glared back. "But I totally respect it. Boundaries," Kirishima added, sliding his arm back and crossing both over his chest. "I'm Kaminari," the blonde announced. "And I'm done with this conversation," Katsuki rumbled as he moved away from the excited teens. Sorry, he's not very sociable with strangers," Izuku stuttered. "His name is Katsuki Bakugu." "Ah, it's fine. You two know each other? That's sick. Mina and I went to the same middle school, but we're from different crowds. She was super popular though, so I know her." "She's the pink one," Kirishima rambled as the girl he'd mentioned stepped up to throw. "Oh, I think I'm next, so I'm gonna just dash," Izuku muttered as he edged away. Quickly he turned on his heel and got in line to throw. When it actually was his turn, he got a decent score by using dark energy to power up an arm. The two he'd met earlier cheered him on and complimented his throw afterwards. However, no one was really prepared for the girl who stepped up last. She was the one to have spoken out a few times at the beginning of class, and so far hadn't really shown off any quirk up to that point. Once Aizawa handed her the ball, she stepped into the ring and gave it a funny look. Then she just lightly tossed it forward. A grin spread across her face as it rose into the air. Everyone looked on in awe as what appeared to be some kind of telekinesis forced the ball higher and higher. And then higher. And higher. Soon it was a speck in the sky, barely able to be seen, but the girl continued to wait. A few more minutes passed until Aizawa just sighed and turned the device to face the class. A small infinity sign was displayed. "What?" one of the boys exclaimed. Students gawked as the girl just stepped back into the group. Izuku was speechless and very much confused, and eventually his curiosity got the best of him. He approached the girl quietly and waved to get her attention. "Hi, I'm Izuku Midoriya," he introduced. "Ochako Uraraka," she replied with a smile. "I don't just... How the heck did you do that?" he spluttered, cheeks growing hot. "Oh, well, my quirk is zero gravity. Anything I touch with all 5 fingers loses its gravitational pull and floats away until I touch all my fingertips together to release it," she explained while resting a hand on her chin. Izuku's hands itched for a pencil and paper to begin analyzing her quirk, and he unconsciously began muttering to himself before looking her in the eyes and asking quickly, "Do you know how much stuff you could affect? Or like how big of an object you could float? Like what about a building? Or the earth? I mean, you could kill us all if you just touched the ground." "Oh, no, she exclaimed, waving her hands back and forth. "No, there's a limit. Right now I can probably float a few people. Maybe a car or a small truck. But the more I practice, the heavier the objects I can do." That could be very powerful one day," Izuku mumbled to himself before turning to her. "We'll have to talk more because that's fascinating." "Oh, okay," Uraraka gasped. A blush dusted her cheeks, and she clasped her hands behind her back. "We can do that." "Great." Izuku beamed, and he wandered off to find Katsuki before the last event. He wasn't there to see the girl he left behind practically jump for joy and burn red with embarrassment and glee. The last event went similarly to the first in terms of winners, although Izuku placed a bit better considering his entrance exam experiences. The results were posted on a screen outside and everyone rushed to find their names. Cheers erupted as many students were filled with relief at not coming in last. Everyone except a very short, purple-haired boy was celebrating in their own way. The boy's head was actually covered in a row of purple baubles that resembled grapes. "I came in last?" he exclaimed. "Oh, don't worry," Yairzu began. "I'll never get to touch a woman's voluptuous curves," he wailed. "I have to be a hero." Immediately she backed off and rejoined a group of girls she'd been talking to earlier. Aizawa surveyed the results quietly before calling the students' attention. "You should all know. I was lying when I said I'd expel the last place student. It was a calculated deception to make sure you all tried your hardest and truly displayed your abilities." "What?" the grape-headed boy shrieked. Tears and snot covered his face as he kneeled before the scoreboard. Obviously it had been a lie, Yairzu mumbled to herself. "What do you mean?" Izuku asked quietly. "Well, no teacher would expel a student purely based on a physical assessment. Like Uraraka pointed out earlier, potential for hero work is based on a lot more than just a standardized PE test. I mean, someone could have excellent strategic skills and aptitude for rescue work but never have an opportunity to show that here. It would be senseless to expel anyone before you examine that aspect," she explained. A few others were listening in at that point. "I guess you're right," Izuku agreed with a slight grin. "You're very perceptive, Yairzu." "Thank you," she replied as a light blush dusted her cheeks. "But my classmates can call me Yamamoto if you'd like," she trailed off. "Of course you don't have to, it's just the nickname I've always liked and dash." "You're very perceptive, Yamamoto," Izuku interjected, a knowing look clouding his face. She just beamed in response. "Nerd." "Nice job," Katsuki gruffly interrupted the conversation. "Kaken." Izuku lit up at his friend's compliment. "You did pretty amazing too." "Third is great." "Whatever," he grumbled. "I could have destroyed these extras in a real fight, so I don't care." "I know," Izuku grinned. "You're in a good mood," Katsuki said as the class began walking back to the locker rooms. "Well, I think I made a new friend." Her name's Uraraka, the Infinity Girl. She told me all about her quirk and agreed to talk more about it later too. Oh, and I spoke to Ida a bit more, he's really not so bad. And the girl with the frog quirk Azui, Urtsu. Izuku recanted. You mean you talked to strangers and didn't spontaneously combust? Props. Right? Izuku exclaimed. I mean I was nervous, but Uraraka's so warm and bubbly that I totally got used to her. And Tsu and Ida were asking about my quirk, which is easy to talk about. Well, good. Yeah. They walked quietly for a moment before Izuku asked, So did anyone seem bearable to you? Nope. They're all absolute morons, Katsuki groaned. What about that Kirishima guy? Or Kaminari? Or one of the girls? Izuku prompted. Don't get me started on those two, they're effing annoying. And the only girl I could even remotely bear was that chick with the purple hair and dangly ear bits. But that's just 'cause she never spoke, he rambled. Well, maybe you two will hit it off. Doubt it. I said she was bearable, but she looked like a total emo goth nightmare. I don't think we'd have much in common. Besides, you're annoying enough as is. I do not need another idiot stuck in my life, Katsuki replied. Thanks. You know what I mean. At that point they entered the boys' locker room and began changing. Shitty hair wasn't so bad, but I couldn't see us as friends. I've been summoned? Something about friendship? Kirishima called as he joined the two boys. He was already shirtless and grinning like a maniac. Oh god, shitty hair, put on some clothes. Katsuki growled as he untied the laces on his shoes. His head was ducked down and Izuku swore the other was blushing. Whatever. These uniform shirts aren't nearly as manly as they could be, Kirishima commented as he held one up. I like them, Izuku replied. But I can't tie ties very well, so that's annoying. Bro. Owning up to your flaws. Super manly. The redhead held up a hand for a high five, and Izuku hesitantly obliged. After that he sauntered away to finish changing, and Katsuki groaned. What? Izuku asked in concern. He's insufferable. I thought he was nice? Izuku protested as he pulled his own shirt off only to quickly replace it with his button-up. Sometimes being, never mind, Katsuki backtracked with a shake of his head. That's even more confusing. I changed my mind, Katsuki muttered as he finished changing and beelined for the exit, Izuku close behind, tie still undone. Izuku just sighed and followed. Their first day was over, and both simply wanted to return home to relax for a moment before the real work began tomorrow. They walked home together as always, and split their respective ways. The next day would hopefully be less challenging, although both knew this was only the beginning. School began the next day without much fuss, much to Izuku's relief. His classmates all filed into the classroom one by one, except for Ida and Yamamoto, who were the only students to arrive before Izuku and Katsuki. Yamamoto was writing quickly in a notebook with a large textbook beside her, and Ida just sat patiently, eyeing the door. Soon the class was almost full and small conversations had popped up around the room. With a few minutes left until class began, Izuku felt a tap on his shoulder from behind. Hey, you're the shadow slime thingy kid, right? The purple-haired boy muttered after Izuku turned around. Yes, Izuku replied hesitantly, it's actually. Sick. Can you make anything out of that stuff? He asked with one eyebrow ped. Pretty much, Izuku trailed off. He sat up a bit more and tilted to fully face the boy. I'm Izuku Midoriya, by the way. Mineta, he blurted quickly before scanning the classroom and continuing. So, you think you could lift her skirt? His eyes bulged as he practically drooled over Yamamoto, who still sat hunched at her desk, working on some type of extra homework. What? Izuku gasped. You want me to do what? Just for a sec. I've never seen a woman so. Mineta trailed off as he continued to stare down the oblivious girl. No. No way, dude. Are you crazy? I don't even like Dash. Mineta cut him off quickly and made eye contact. Oh please, Midoriya? She would never even have to know. And no, Izuku stuttered as he tried to turn back to face forward. Hey, what's wrong with you? Don't you want to see too? Mineta retorted as he grabbed Izuku's shoulder. No. Let go, Izuku muttered. trying not to attract any attention. Luckily Aizawa shuffled into the room at that moment. Hey class. Today you'll be my neta, hands off Midoriya or I'll expel you for real. As I was saying, today you will have a much more hands-on class. All Might will be instructing a Quirk-oriented class. He's a few minutes late today, so I'll be getting you all started. First, you'll need your hero costumes. You all submitted designs to the support course, where our staff alongside actual hero costume companies have interpreted and improved upon your designs. These costumes are tailored to you specifically and will be subject to change as you grow and learn what works and does not. You'll find them in cases at the back of the room with your seat number. Go ahead and grab your costume and then go change. All Might should meet you outside soon for your class. With that, he collapsed into his desk chair and promptly laid his head down. Mr. Aizawa? Sue began. With a groan the teacher lifted his head from the desk with a scowl. What? Are you okay? She croaked, a look of concern plastered over her features. His expression softened a moment before he responded, Yes, I'm your teacher. I would not come to class to teach if I wasn't prepared. Now move along before that meathead beats you to his own class. He then promptly returned his head to its spot. Once they all had changed into their hero costumes, the students of 1A filed out into what appeared to be a street, but was obviously uninhabited. Each student eagerly anticipated the coming lesson, although some were more distracted than others. Mineta's eyes were glued to the girls, specifically Yamamoto, in their hero costumes. Izuku scanned his classmates for a minute before spotting Katsuki and rushing over. Hey Kaken. Hey nerd, Katsuki mumbled, eyeing his Izuku's new hero costume. It was surprisingly minimal for Izuku's taste. The costume consisted of pretty plain black pants and green forearm guards, then his chest and back were exposed and his shoulders and neck were covered with green fabric, but Katsuki assumed his neck was probably armored. He had a black face mask pulled down around his neck. His boots were green, but Katsuki knew a ton of design had gone into them to allow Izuku to still use his quirk with his feet. He had a belt with a few pouches of first aid equipment, and one ear had a communication device on it. If Katsuki was being honest, it was a pretty good design, although he preferred his own. Your costume is so cool, Izuku said in awe. I know, yours is good. Very shirtless. Izuku's face immediately flushed and his arms came up to cover his chest. I need to be able to easily use my quirk, so that means I need a bit of skin exposed, he mumbled. Katsuki chuckled before slapping a hand into Izuku's shoulder. You're too easy to tease. With that remark, All Might came rushing past the huddled-up students, notes in hand. Hello class. You have my sincerest apologies for tardiness. Let's get started. He coughed a moment before clearing his throat and beginning. Today we will be doing combat training. Several students brightened up at that. Combat training? Hell yeah. Kirishima shouted, a fist pumping into the air. Kaminari was standing near him as well as Mina, the pink-skinned girl Kirishima pointed out yesterday. They all seemed elated by All Might's announcement. Uraraka quietly walked up to Izuku's side. I know everyone's excited for this combat stuff, but I wish we had more training first. My quirk isn't really suited to this. Izuku's eyes practically popped out of his skull at that. What do you mean? Your quirk would be like career ending in a fight. Uraraka just looked at him, confusion apparent on her features. All you have to do is touch someone and they would float away and not be able to fight back. Then you just drop them from high enough and be instant victory. Not to mention if you started really analyzing it. Uraraka smiled at Izuku. Thanks, she mumbled, hair falling into her face to obscure the blush slowly forming there. Not that Izuku noticed. By the way, I really like your hero costume, Uraraka added. Izuku grinned back at her. I like yours too. Very pink. If it was possible, the blush on her face grew even darker. Okay, settle down, All Might called, grabbing the class's attention. I will randomly assign you all partners, and then I will draw 2 teams. One will be the villains who are protecting a very large bomb, and the others will be the heroes trying to either capture the villains or secure the bomb. The villains win if they remain uncaptured and protect the bomb for 15 minutes. The heroes win if they detain the villains with capture tape provided to them or touch the bomb. The villain team will have 5 minutes to plan and hide the bomb in the building ahead of us while the heroes create a strategy. He looked up from his notes at the expectant students. Any questions? Immediately hands shot into the air. Sir, wouldn't it be better to allow us to choose our partners so we get the maximum teamwork and compatibility between quirks? But aren't we supposed to be training to be heroes? Why does one team have to be villains? Why aren't we training outside Kero? Wouldn't that be easier? What if we're partnered with someone who makes us uncomfortable? Oh yeah, what if I don't get partnered with a girl? I don't want to get stuck with another dude. All Might looked absolutely overwhelmed by the questions flying at him. Extras! Bakugu shouted, stepping away and turning to face the class. Shut the F up. Silence fell over the students. Thank you, young Bakugu, All Might mumbled before addressing the class. To answer your questions, you don't always get to choose what hero you're teamed up with in an emergency. Versatility is key, even if your quirks clash. Also, while most of the fights you see and hear about are out in the open, much more of the battles take place inside villains' hideouts. And, while you are training to be heroes, it is important to understand the way villains think so you can predict their moves, and most villains would prefer a closed-off fight in an area they're familiar with. Murmurs of agreement and understanding filtered through the class. Most everyone seemed satisfied with his explanation. Okay, so to begin, partners. All Might clapped his hands together before pulling a list from his pocket. I paired you up randomly earlier with Aizawa's help, so here are your pairings: Bakugu and Midoriya, Ojiro and Hagakure, Shuji and Todoroki, Kirishima and Ida, Siro and Uraraka, Yaoyorozu and Mineta, Tokoyami and Azui, Jairu and Kaminari, Ashido and Aoyama, and Sato and Koda. The students quickly paired up. Chatter and cheers could be heard from a few teams whilst groans were murmured from a few. Alright, now to draw villains and heroes. All Might announced. A pair of boxes had been placed a few feet away at some point, and All Might quickly grabbed them in order to draw teams. Okay, first up will be, he rummaged through the box for a moment before drawing out a slip of paper, Bakugu and Midoriya as the heroes. He stuck his other hand into the opposite box. And Kirishima and Ida as the villains. All Might set the names aside and quickly drew the rest of the pairings in order of hero versus villain. Todoroki and Shuji versus Ojiro and Hagakure, Tokoyami and Azui versus Siro and Uraraka, Denki and Jairu versus Yaoyorozu and Mineta, and Aoyama and Ashido versus Sato and Koda. Izuku eyed Katsuki as they stood beside one another. The blonde simply stared ahead, watching his classmates with disdain. Izuku grinned to himself as All Might busied himself getting everyone ready and then sequestering himself and the others to the viewing room. Once everything was done and settled, Katsuki turned to his partner. Okay nerd, what's the plan? Oh, well we've trained so much together that our quirks should be plenty compatible at this point. We only really need to work out a plan to locate the bomb. Katsuki grinned before responding. That's easy. We just have to find the villains. If they have any brains at all, they'll be guarding it. We shouldn't split up until we have to. We'll be more effective together, and in a real-life situation it would be too dangerous. We're against that shitty-haired nerd and Four Eyes. Remind me their quirks again, Katsuki grumbled. Kirishima's quirk is hardening, and Ida has engines in his calves that give him super speed, Izuku recalled. Okay. Well, Shitty Hair's quirk will be most effective against me, and Four Eyes will be pretty versatile if he has a brain in that stupid head of his. True, but if we locate them quickly there should be no problem overwhelming them, Izuku mumbled. We just need to be fast and thorough. All Might's voice crackled to life in the earpieces he'd given them. Time to begin. Izuku and Katsuki shared a glance before bolting into the building. Sprinting through hallways proved ineffective for almost a full 3 minutes. By then Katsuki was practically smoking at the ears, granted that might have been a little more than Izuku's imagination given the hot-headed teen's quirk. However, arriving on the 3rd floor, voices could be heard filtering through the halls. Dude, Ida, I get like we're supposed to be trying and all, but seriously, we couldn't have been pitted against tougher opponents. Kirishima's voice whined. Have no fear, comrade. No plan they could concoct will foil our evil plots. Bro, Kirishima trailed off and the voices faded. Izuku motioned for Katsuki to follow him, and he quickly formed a shield from dark matter. The shadow-like material came up in a wall before him, stemming from his open palm. Quietly he approached the room the voice had come from, Katsuki close behind, palms open and ready to attack. With a flash, the two entered an open area. The bomb was clearly seen in the center of the room, and the two villains stood before it in fighting stances. Your reign of tyranny is over, heroes. Ida shouted, fully in character. Kaken! Izuku called as he dropped into a crouch, shield over his body. Immediately Katsuki jumped forward and onto the sleek black surface as Izuku sprung up, launching the other into the air above his opponents. Explosions rained down on the two. Ida took cover as best he could while Kirishima simply hardened his skin, arms coming up instinctively to cover his face. While both were distracted by Katsuki's assault, Izuku had already begun his own attack. Tendrils of black matter coiled around Ida's ankles. Without warning, the blue-haired boy was hoisted aloft by his legs. "Unhand me!" Ida shrieked. "Ida!" Kirishima called, rushing forward to help his teammate. However, his approach was cut off by a snarling teen. "Oh, come on, shitty hair. Don't forget about me," Katsuki grumbled, palms popping and sparking. Kirishima's arms came back up as the other launched explosions at him. Izuku didn't wait around to watch their battle. He quickly slapped capture tape onto Ida's armor and placed him away from the fighting. Kirishima and Katsuki weren't really getting anywhere with their fight. Explosions slowly pushed the other towards the wall, but his hardening left him pretty much invincible to Katsuki's attacks, a fact that seemed to anger him to no end. "Kaken, hurry up," Izuku called from his position beside the bomb. "Yeah," the other growled. Without warning, he suddenly ceased his volley of firepower. He snatched Kirishima's wrist before the other even had time to react and swung him over his shoulder, an explosion slamming him as hard as possible into the concrete floor. With an open palm pressed against Kirishima's chest right over his heart, Katsuki slapped capture tape onto his opponent with his free hand. A grin exploded over his face. "Figured it'd be better to capture both villains," he rumbled as he stood. Kirishima just laid in shock for a minute before All Might's voice crackled back to life. "Well done, heroes. Valiant effort from both teams. Hurry to the viewing site unless you need to see Recovery Girl so we can proceed with more battles," All Might announced into the earpieces. Izuku followed the three other teens into a fairly dark room. His classmates were gathered around a huge monitor on one wall expectantly. Todoroki and Shuji were standing outside of the same building the four had just left. A few minutes passed silently before All Might declared the beginning of the battle. Shuji's limbs immediately transformed into ears and eyes, surveying the structure. He muttered something inaudible to Todoroki before the other waved him back. His right hand touched the wall and instantly ice burst forth. Izuku watched bug-eyed as ice covered the entire building in seconds. Todoroki silently stepped into the giant ice cube. Cameras picked him up on the second floor where he stopped beside a set of footprints seemingly belonging to Hagakure, their invisible classmate. He was spotted a minute later on the third floor. He mumbled something to a shivering Ojiro who put up no fight as he gingerly placed an open palm upon the bomb. The class gasped as the ice began to melt away rapidly. The camera switched back to the outside view as Todoroki exited, followed by his opponents from a literally steaming building. The following battle was finished in a similar fashion. Azui and Tokoyami entered unfazed by their opponents. Uraraka got the chance to float Azui to the ceiling, but before Siro could capture anyone, Tokoyami's shadow burst forth. The battle was finished in seconds once the heroes located their opponent. Izuku had high hopes for Yaoyorozu, however being electrified seemed to put a damper on her chances. Kaminari entered the building alone, one palm covered in electricity as he grinned like a maniac. He emerged minutes later, a dopey smile painted on his face, but with the villains in tow. The cameras were fried by his attack, so there wasn't much to watch there. The longest fight was the last and the villains were the only to win. Sato's super strength combined with an array of animals that Ashido was terrified to injure overpowered the hero pair. They couldn't even get near the bomb. Katsuki changed in silence in the locker room. Izuku was a few feet away doing the same. However, he should have known the quiet was too good to be true. Hey man, that move you did in the combat training with Midoriya was insane. Did you two plan that or something? Kirishima babbled loudly. Katsuki groaned internally as he looked up to see the teen was shirtless again. Put on a demon shirt, Katsuki growled, pulling his own off over his head. You're one to talk. Kirishima laughed. Besides, I don't mind being shirtless. It's super manly. But I'm not talking to you until you're fully dressed, Katsuki grumbled, pulling a clean shirt over his head. Fine bro, but only because you asked so nicely, Kirishima mumbled sarcastically. He returned moments later, tugging a white t-shirt over his red spikes. Katsuki groaned as he got an eyeful of flexed muscles before the idiot managed to clothe himself. Now spill. How'd you two do that? By then Izuku had made his way to Katsuki's side. Do what? Izuku asked with a smile. That insane move where you practically threw Bakugo 10 feet in the air. Kirishima explained animatedly. Oh, Kaken and I have been training together for a while, Izuku supplied. We've known each other for years, so it just made sense because we both wanted to enter the hero course. Man, that's not fair. Kirishima complained. Promise you'll let the rest of us in on some kickbutt combo moves too? Izuku blushed before nodding vigorously. Let's go, nerd. Your mom probably wonders what happened to you, Katsuki said as he grabbed the back of Izuku's shirt, pulling him away from the conversation. Oh bye. I'm gonna hold you two to that promise. Kirishima called as they exited the locker room, one more day completed. Momo gathered her books and shoved them into her bag quickly before leaving the locker room. She was one of the last to leave today, but it didn't really faze her. The halls were practically empty. It just meant fewer awkward stares as she made her way through the school. As she entered the main hall, she thought she caught sight of something purple darting out of view, but she ignored it, choosing to take her time admiring the school's architecture. Even though it wasn't part of her own studies for her quirk, she knew quite a bit about when UA was built as her grandparents had been major donors. It honored her to know her family helped make her education a possibility. A glint caught her eye in one of the smaller halls as she made her way through the building. She swore she'd seen someone that time. Unable to ignore it, she figured a quick check wouldn't hurt. Maybe someone was lost. She took a moment to follow the hall, but whatever or whoever she'd seen seemed to be long gone. Turning back on her heel, something tugged at her foot. Glancing down, Momo saw a purple bauble had trapped her foot in one spot. Confused, she glanced around again. Mineta had left already, hadn't he? Laughter reached her ears and made her skin crawl. Yairzu, I never thought you'd come to me. Mineta's voice came from behind her. Mineta? What are you doing here so late? Momo asked hesitantly, panic rising in her throat as all the comments he'd made in just 2 days ran through her mind in an instant. I should be asking you that. Man, I'm so lucky. I never thought someone so mature would fall right in my lap. A hand rested on her waist, causing her to flinch back violently. Memories of hands, wandering hands, flew through her mind. Middle school had been full of curious boys with no sense of boundaries, but she'd figured she would have left that all behind when she entered UA. Apparently not. Mineta chuckled at her reaction. I'm not gonna hurt you, Yamamoto, he sneered. It's practically a sin to walk around looking like you do and not let anyone get a taste. It's so selfish. His hand slid lower before squeezing. Momo flinched at that, but remained still. Wow, you're surprisingly compliant. And so, soft. He finally came into her view. His hand left her back and wandered up to her chest shamelessly. He squeezed tentatively. Momo slammed her eyes shut as he continued. She counted backwards from 1,000 by sevens, a trick she learned from another girl in her situation in middle school, distracting herself from the roaming fingers. She blocked out the memories that seemed to claw at her skin as the boy before her did the same. Everything was a blur. Eventually, though, she allowed her eyes to open hesitantly. The feeling of hands hadn't left her skin yet, but apparently Mineta had left, much to her surprise. Glancing down, she found her clothes intact. Releasing a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, Momo pried her shoe from the purple bauble on the floor. It had long ago lost its adhesive properties. Gathering herself, she made her way quickly down the hallways and out of the school. She didn't stop to admire anything this time. Katsuki wrestled his arm from the tight grip of a paramedic, anger flashing brightly in his eyes as he stared down the poor woman who was just trying to do her job. She finally gave up trying to secure the explosive teen to the gurney, allowing him to bolt away. Katsuki scanned the faces of his teachers and classmates frantically. When green eyes met his own, he darted through the crowd. "Izuku, what happened? Where were you?" he pressed. He had barely registered that the other boy was lying in a gurney, sleep tugging at his eyes and skin marred with bruising. I landed in the shipwreck zone with Tsu and Mineta," Izuku began, determination solidifying in his eyes despite how tired he was. "We made it out of there pretty quick, but then while we were making our way back to the entrance, we passed Aizawa and a choked sob made its way out of Izuku's throat. He was fighting all on his own, and then this scary guy came up and his quirk fascination glinted in his eyes under the pain. It was like disintegration or something, I couldn't really tell, but I wasn't going to wait too. I jumped in because I was scared he was going to kill Aizawa." Katsuki glared hard at his friend, any worry or concern slipping away. Izuku seemed to understand before he could scold him though. "I know I should have waited, but he really was about to die," he mumbled. Yeah, Katsuki sighed. How did he scan Izuku's body, taking in the bruising, the blood, the bandages, and everything else? "This happened. It's not as bad as it looks," Izuku quickly replied. "Well, this bird thing came, I think the disintegration guy called him Nomu. Anyway, he was crazy powerful, and I was trying to hold him off because Tsu and Mineta were right behind me and neither of them have very good fight-style quirks. You know they'd be more adept as rescue heroes. Anyways, I tried to capture him with some dark matter, but he absorbed it? I think he had some sort of absorption quirk. Something similar happened when All Might arrived and I didn't know what else to do. So I concentrated it in myself to hopefully power up and fight him close range, but he flung me like a ragdoll. He wasn't even fazed by any of my attacks. A few other small-time villains tried to fight me as well, but Todoroki showed up. He took care of them pretty quick, but I was so disoriented that they landed a few hits. I don't really know what happened after that, but you should have seen All Might in action. He totally destroyed Momo, and the disintegration guy was running pretty quick." The fire in Izuku's eyes only seemed to burn brighter as he rambled on, but he was obviously exhausted. "Excuse me," a paramedic exclaimed, noticing Katsuki beside her patient. "Please don't get him worked up. He has a severe concussion and needs to rest so Recovery Girl can heal him. He'll need his strength. He's very out of it. Now isn't the time to get his story. He likely will focus on unimportant details because he's so disoriented," she explained rapidly, putting herself between the two boys. Izuku gazed at her in confusion before nodding solemnly and then grinning at Bakugo. Said teen only fumed at the paramedic. He knew she was doing her job. And she was right, Izuku was definitely out of it, but Katsuki was his best friend. He grunted in acknowledgement and gave Izuku a look. "I'm a nerd, you didn't tell me you were that badly injured." The paramedic seemed unfazed that he was ignoring her, but she began fiddling with Izuku's bandages, flitting around his gurney, and checking all his vitals. Katsuki didn't expect a response from his friend and instead hoisted himself onto the gurney beside Izuku. Seeing the paramedic about to protest, he spat, "I won't mess up his bandages or anything. He's my best friend. I won't leave him alone after all this sheet." She nodded in understanding and ceased her fiddling and flitting. Izuku locked eyes with Katsuki for a minute before mumbling about being tired but not being allowed to sleep and resting his head on Katsuki's shoulder. After a minute of watching him, Katsuki took in the rest of his classmates. A few of the girls had grouped up around Yaoyorozu and the quiet girl with dangly bits on her ears, Jairu, who were recanting their side of the story beside Pikachu's Kami-something, gurney. He definitely didn't look right, but Katsuki didn't really care enough to dissect that at this moment. Not far from them, shitty hair was being looked over by a seemingly very flustered paramedic, and the pink girl was crying beside him about what Katsuki couldn't give two F's. Nearer to them, Todoroki and the Invisible Girl were discussing something and Todoroki did not look pleased. It was probably the most emotion Katsuki had seen from him. Sue and Mineta were on separate gurneys beside Izuku's and talking to a police officer. He suspected it had something to do with the absolutely wrecked state Aizawa had been found in, considering they had been close enough to witness a majority of what went down. The rest of the class were standing relatively close to one another, but they weren't talking, just taking in everything that had happened. Katsuki sighed and glanced back at Shitty Hair, who was now animatedly gesturing toward Katsuki himself as he talked to the pink girl. The paramedic had moved on to someone else. Katsuki flushed as the red-haired teen locked eyes with him from across the area. He shot up and quickly made his way to Katsuki and Izuku, Pinky in tow. "Bakugo, you and I made a pretty manly team back there, huh?" he exclaimed, a grin lighting up his battered face. Pinky sniffled and watched from beside him. "Shut up, Shitty Hair," Katsuki growled in a low voice. "You're way too loud. Izuku has a concussion and you're gonna make it worse." Kirishima flushed all the way to his neck before replying, "Sorry bro, I didn't know. But we totally kicked butt." He flashed a toothy grin before gesturing toward his friend. "I was just telling Mina all about it and how awesome you were." Katsuki rolled his eyes. "We just did what we had to. Would you stop blabbering about it to everyone?" The pink girl correction. Mina glanced up at that. "No way, Bakugo. Everyone else pretty much just tried to avoid villains or was protected by the pros. You and Kiri though, you two fought back." Katsuki looked at her in bewilderment. "The F-dash? Izuku fought back. Todoroki fought back. Hell, Frogger and Blue Ball over there fought back. Well, I dunno about Sue and Mineta, but Midoriya and Todoroki, you and Kiri, you guys are like the top in our class right now. Today really proved who's who." Kirishima looked at her like she had hung the stars in the sky. For some reason it made Katsuki's stomach twist in discomfort. He felt like throwing up. "Shut the F up, Pinky." "Mina!" Kirishima exclaimed. He wrapped her in a bone-crushing hug. Katsuki looked away. "You're so sweet, bro. Get a room," Katsuki scoffed, and I immediately Kirishima unlatched from his friend. "Whatever, Bakugo," Kiri began. "You and Izuku are just as bad." He grinned at the blush and wrath that rolled off of Katsuki at his comment. "Anyway, today has been rough, so I get why you're so prickly. I'll leave you two alone." Katsuki was practically smoking in his seat as he watched the two teens walk away from him. Actually, he might actually have been smoking given his quirk. Izuku awoke to blinding white lights and scratchy sheets in an unfamiliar bed. He could feel someone boring holes into the side of his head with their gaze as he squinted against the lights. Soon they flickered off and a familiar voice quietly addressed him. He was thankful for the volume, because his head was pounding. "Hey nerd. Kaken," Izuku called despite knowing it was him. He winced at the scratchiness and volume of his own voice. "Who the F else?" Katsuki came into view, but his features were hard to make out in the darkness. "Am I in the hospital?" "No, just the nurse's office. Recovery girl healed you at the USJ, but you passed out pretty much immediately, so we brought you here. Your mom is at home waiting for the call that you're awake. I was allowed to stay since I'm a student," he murmured as he sat on the edge of the bed. "Oh, is anyone else here? Like hurt?" "Pikachu Kaminari I think was his name, yeah. He was here for a while, but since he wasn't injured, just his quirk fried his brain, his parents picked him up pretty quick. Also a few were here in the beginning for some bruises and scratches, but they're all gone now. You were the only one really beat up since you oh so smartly ran right into Aizawa's battle and got your butt handed to you." Izuku gazed back at his friend, eyes wide open now. "Oh, is Aizawa?" He trailed off. "Oh, that old butt man is just fine," Katsuki replied. "Well," he began after a second, but decided against it. "No, yeah, he's gonna be okay." Izuku looked skeptical but accepted it nonetheless. "What time is it?" he asked. Like 6 or something. It's not too late. We got back from the USJ like 5 hours ago." Katsuki eyed Izuku before grabbing his phone from where it was charging beside Izuku's bed. "Want me to call Auntie and then go get Recovery Girl?" "Yeah, I guess." Izuku closed his eyes for a minute, before they sprang back open. Wait, did they get the villains? Did they find them? Katsuki started. Well, they got that Noma guy, but everyone else escaped since the mist dude had that warp quirk. They didn't get what they came for though, so it isn't all bad. Well yeah. If All Might had died, I think that would have been pretty shitty, Izuku deadpanned. Katsuki grinned at Izuku's joke. If he was joking, he couldn't be too bad off. Katsuki stepped outside to call Inko and get Recovery Girl before quickly returning. Oh hey, by the way, your hero costume was taken for repairs by the support course like as soon as we got to school, so your mom is bringing some spare clothes. Oh. Izuku glanced down and sure enough he was wearing a hospital gown. He quickly began stuttering as a blush crept up his neck to his cheeks. Wait, who's changed my clothes? Katsuki glared back at him. You were already half naked. Why do you care? Kaken. Oh fine. I knew you'd hate it if a girl albeit an old but lady saw you almost naked, so I made the old hag let me do it. Izuku's blush darkened. Look me in the eyes and tell me you'd rather that 2-foot-tall, granny but lady had changed your clothes, Katsuki cut him off. Izuku's mouth snapped shut, and he just glared at Katsuki. Exactly. They stared each other down for a minute before Izuku huffed and turned away. Jesus, Izuku. It's nothing I haven't seen, you big baby. Yeah, he whined, but we're both gay. Oh, for the love of I've known you since we were like 2 months old. You're like my effing brother. Well, Mina and Kirishima were implying things earlier. Those two are dumber than a box of rocks. Still. Katsuki rolled his eyes and let out a chuckle. You're impossible. Don't laugh at me. I'm injured. Whatever, nerd. Your mom is gonna be here soon, and Recovery Girl just told me to remind you not to stare at a screen. 4 hours on end unless you want a migraine for the rest of the week. Katsuki flopped into the nearest chair and began scrolling aimlessly through his phone. Izuku just pouted silently. Eventually Inko did arrive, spare change of clothes and enough tears to fill an ocean in hand. She practically drowned Izuku in kisses and hugs when she finally got to see him. She also offered Katsuki a ride home, so the two spent an entire car ride getting an earful of how they should be more careful and how it's okay to run away sometimes and everything else she'd been holding in since receiving the call about her son. School was cancelled for the last 2 days of the week because they were investigating just how on earth a villain had managed to find out where All Might would be during the day and how to get into the USJ. The whole ordeal made national television and was all over social media. The few times members of 1A did go out in those days or over the weekend, they were bombarded by reporters, nosy civilians and new fans, on subways and in the streets. Somehow a roster and their pictures had gotten leaked. The school heightened security immensely, only allowing staff, students, or other personnel with a UA ID to enter school grounds. Even parents were not permitted to enter for the safety of the students, something that upset most of the public. Izuku and Katsuki returned to UA on Monday along with the rest of the class to be completely shocked with the news that the UA Sports Festival would still be taking place in the upcoming week. Most had been speculating that it would be cancelled because it would be another opportunity to attack. Others hoped it would still go on, while some were scared or nervous about so much media exposure. Class 1A, however, the ones who had been attacked and traumatized were more than excited for the opportunity. In fact, they were ready, eager, and thrilled that it would still be happening. Katsuki was practically vibrating with excitement when he sat down beside Izuku to eat lunch on Monday. We get to fight in the sports festival, he stated bluntly, a smirk threatening to blossom across his face. Izuku nodded shakily. Yeah. He was practically vibrating for a different reason. Nerves. Okay, I get the anxiety, but you are seriously failing to match my energy right now, Katsuki replied bluntly, a frown replacing his almost smile. I know. I'm sorry, Kaken. I'm trying to remind myself that we trained and we're ready for this. I mean, we're gonna get even more training in the next week too. It's just with the USJ incident and my own anxiety, I'm just nervous is all. I know, nerd, Katsuki began. You are ready. And I'm taking the #1 spot, so it's not like you have to worry too much about it. I'll crush you no matter what anyways. Izuku offered a wobbly smile at that before jumping practically 3 feet in the air when 3 people plopped loudly into the seats across from him. Bakugo! Midoriya! Kirishima pretty much yelled as he sat his tray of food down. Hey, you two! Mina added equally as loudly. Sup? Kaminari tacked on. What the actual hell are you three doing? Bakugo growled, mood dipping into annoyance. Bro, we just wanted to get to know you guys better. Kirishima winced, a hand clutching his chest as if he were physically wounded at the comment. Yeah bro. Kaminari joined, mirroring Kirishima's pose. We just want to be friends with you. You two are so what's the word? Isolated. We are perfectly fine you morons, Katsuki replied, a scowl growing. Kaken, they just want to be nice. Izuku attempted to neutralize the situation. He genuinely wanted to meet and learn about his classmates, but his ability to start those kinds of interactions was non-existent to say the least. Now the opportunity was falling right in his lap, but Katsuki was being, and he hated to say it, an a-hole. Thanks Midoriya. Kiri and Kami are just speaking facts, Mina began. I like you too. Even though you're so bristly, I like you. Midoriya balances you out nicely. She beamed at the two. Izuku flushed even darker at that comment and looked to Katsuki for a cue in what to say next. Unfortunately, Katsuki just bristled at the comment. Anyway, let's get to know each other better. We've been in class less than a week and we already almost died twice if you count Mr. Aizawa's attempt on day 1. Kaminari joked. Whatever, Katsuki scoffed, leaning back in his seat. Okay, Kaminari replied. Something seemed to catch his eye though, and before he could begin asking questions he was flailing his arms around like an idiot, waving someone else over to their table. Yo! The quiet girl with dangly earbits sauntered over, a tall but lanky kid with very strange elbows in tow. Zero. Join the fun. We just convinced Mr. Explodokill here and the apparent cinnamon roll to play some getting to know each other games, Kaminari announced. Izuku felt his anxiety spike at Kaminari's comment. Cinnamon roll? What in the world was that even supposed to mean? I never agreed to games, Bakugo snarled. Kaken, Izuku whined. Just let them have fun. I want to meet everyone in our class. He bit his tongue to avoid saying anything more embarrassing than that, but Bakugo met his eyes and he knew his friend understood. Even though he gave no indication of thinking so, Izuku knew Katsuki understood. Great idea, Kaminari. Mina agreed. The two additions sat down quietly, Ja beside Kaminari on the end of the table and Zero beside her to the left of Bakugo. Kaminari kicked everything off by making everyone go around and say their name and quirk just in case anyone missed anything. Okay, I'll go first. I'm Kaminari Denki. My quirk is electrification, so I can shoot out electricity or cover my body with it like a blanket. Izuku felt the familiar itch in his hands for his notebook, but he couldn't whip it out and begin taking notes in the middle of a conversation. He made a mental note of Kaminari's last statement though most electric users were long-range, but if Kaminari could do what he said, he might be an excellent close-range fighter. I'm Kirishima Ijuku. My quirk is hardening. He hardened his fists and slammed them together for emphasis. Questions zipped through Izuku's head at that. Could he harden enough to nullify blades? Bullets? Explosions? Ashido Mina, but everyone calls me Mina, so call me that. My quirk is acid. That left a lot to the imagination, but his immediate question was if she and Kirishima had tested if his quirk could nullify her own. Realizing it was his own turn, Izuku scrambled to repeat the phrase he'd been using for years about his own quirk. I'm Midoriya Izuku. I have Abyss. It was a mutation and it allows me to manipulate dark matter and dark energy. Bakugo. Explosion. His palms crackled and popped. Izuku would have rolled his eyes if he were more comfortable with those around him. I'm Zero Hanta. My quirk is tape. Pretty self-explanatory. He lifted his arm and pulled a piece of white tape from his elbow. Not knowing what to do with it, he just stuck it to the top of the table. Izuku itched to grab it and examine it, like how strong it was and the adhesive properties, but he just held his breath as the girl beside him spoke. Jirokyoka, don't refer to me. Her dangly earlobes shot up to reveal a small metal tip. My quirk is earphone jack. I can plug it into anything and hear vibrations or plug it into myself and send out vibrations. Now that description almost made Izuku break and grab his notebook. Upon first glance she was obviously a support hero, but if she could create vibrations she could be an extremely powerful hero on her own. He just stifled his thoughts of analysis to pay attention to Mina, who was now shouting something else loudly. Dope! Mina shouted. Okay now, I want to avoid the basic stuff like favorite color and all that, so how about, what's your music taste? You can tell a lot about a person by their music taste, I think. She grinned and then tacked on, we can go around the circle with questions after this until everyone gets a turn. Kiri can go next though. Nice idea. Kirishima beamed. You go first. Oh right. I really like to listen to soft rock type stuff. Like Clario and Birdie. Oh, and can't forget Girl in Red. She smirked a bit to herself, before turning to Izuku. Oh me, well I listen to kinda depressing stuff mostly. But I also like stuff like Train and Neon Trees, I guess. Bakugu rolled his eyes at that answer. Just tell them you listen to Panic! At the Disco and Move On, you idiot. I listen to shit like 3 Days Grace and Linkin Park, shit like that. Kirishima nodded solemnly and Mina stifled a laugh. They all turned to Zero next. Mostly I listen to lo-fi stuff. I just put on a live stream and chill. Cavetown is good too. And that's valid, Mina deadpanned. Okay Jairu. I like pretty much whatever, but Mother, Fauzia, and Hosier are some favorites. She glanced to her left. Kaminari? Oh dope. I like Bird. Neon Trees, I See You, Midoriya, and Labyrinth. I guess. Basic I know. He smiled at Jairu, who only stared back, unfazed. Okay, I guess I'm up. Kirishima started, fists coming back up to the pose he struck earlier without the hardening. I went through a phase in middle school, so I like MCR and NF and stuff like that, but also Chord Overstreet, Day 6, Alexander 23, stuff like that. His smile faltered a second, but he kept the pose up until Mina cut in. Okay, well you pick a question now, and then we'll go around. Right, since the sports festival is still on, what are you guys hoping the challenges will be? Oh, nice one bro. Mina beamed. Izuku agreed it was a nice one. He was eager to see how everyone else viewed their own quirks. Thanks, he replied. Personally, I am hoping for some good old-fashioned feats of strength. Like maybe wrestling or boxing, but I doubt they do individual sports, he trailed off. No worries bro. I bet you'll get plenty of time to show off those guns. Kaminari said as he slapped Kirishima on the back. As his arm fell away, his eyes fell to the table, lost in thought. Oh well, I want an obstacle course. Something I can melt through with my acid. Oh, Izuku stammered, gears turning trying to come up with what would best show off his quirk. Well, my quirk is pretty versatile, but I think I'd want something more intellect-based. Maybe a test of wit. But I want one-on-one battles. I'll destroy everyone. Katsuki exclaimed, the first look of joy flitted across his face as his palms released small explosions. Demon dude, Zero blanched. I'm with Mina. I want an obstacle course. I think I'd side with Midoriya. A test of intellect would appeal to students with less physical quirks. Kaminari? Kirishima asked the blonde who was still staring at the table. To be honest with you guys, my quirk is probably best on one-on-ones like Bakugu, but I don't really like fighting, so I have no clue what I'd want. Hey, don't worry dude. Kirishima reassured his friend, electrical types are usually great long-range fighters. You won't really have to duke it out with anyone unless they have some insane quirk. Izuku had to hold back from arguing with the redhead. I guess, he sighed. A smile quickly masked any sadness though as he looked up at Izuku. Next question. Right? Izuku thought for a minute before asking, does anyone have a hero name picked out yet? I don't have anything in mind quite yet, but does anyone else? King Explosion Murder. Katsuki didn't even look up as he said it. Silence followed before fits of laughter erupted from around the table. Even Izuku let out a giggle. Dude, did you just make a joke? Kaminari wheezed. Oh Bakugu! I love you! Mina squeezed out through laughs. Wow! Who knew you had a sense of humor? Jairu huffed as she clutched her middle in the largest emotion display of the day. Katsuki glared at his companions before muttering under his breath, I wasn't joking but okay. Oh god, that's a tough act to follow, Siro managed to get out as the laughter died down. I don't really have any ideas yet, so I'm still working on a hero name. Same here, Jairu added, face having been schooled back into an emotionless mask. Oh, well this is, Kaminari deflated, I don't have anything either. Do you guys? He asked, turning to the last two. Hell yeah. Red Riot. Kirishima announced. Like Crimson Riot. He's my favorite hero. Oich dude that's so good. Kaminari awed. I'm going with Alien Queen. Mina glowed, hands coming up like she was outlining a billboard. Hey, that totally fits your vibe. Jairu replied. Yeah, you do kinda look like an alien with your eyes and horns. Kaminari added. I know. Mina squealed. But anyways, I'm excited to hear Bakugu's question. Katsuki rolled his eyes and growled, I don't want to know anything else about you extras. Oh come on Bakugu. Kaminari whined. Am I Daria? Can you get him to do it? But doubt he'd listen to me, Izuku chuckled nervously. In reality Izuku could probably blackmail Katsuki with any number of embarrassing childhood anecdotes, but he preferred his skin uncharred, thank you very much. Well if he doesn't listen to you he sure as hell won't listen to us. Kirishima wailed. Now you're starting to get it? Bakugu smirked, grateful that Izuku hadn't pushed it. Ugh you're no fun. Siro. Mina moved on. Well if Bakugu really doesn't want to go, then I have one that might start some drama? Mina and Kaminari immediately perked up. Drama? They asked in unison. Hell yeah, he muttered. Okay, what was your first impression of the person to your? He held the last word out as he looked around the table, deciding on what the best and most tea-filled decision would be. Right. Oh he's really going for it. Mina exclaimed, eyeing Izuku and Katsuki. I guess I'll go first then, Siro said as he turned to Jairu. I thought you were chill I kinda assumed you were kinda emo, but I am too, so that's not a bad thing. He shrugged and waited for her to answer the question too. Oh well I guess you aren't wrong, she sighed. An odd expression came over her face as she turned to Kaminari. I thought you were a loud blonde, and I was correct, she deadpanned. What? That doesn't count. That's just my hair color. Kaminari protested, a pout springing to his face. Oh it's much more than that, Jairu replied, not making eye contact. Kaminari looked miffed as he turned to Kirishima to answer the question. Well I won't give you a lame answer like Jairu. Bro, even though I only met you a week ago, I really felt like I've known you forever. I wish I'd had such a cool bro in middle school. He beamed at Kirishima who was turning just about as red as his hair. You're really chill bro. Man thanks. I totally felt a spark too. Kaminari's eyes lit up at the pun, and he fist bumped Kirishima. The redhead turned to Mina. Mina, I'm not gonna lie. I really thought you were awesome. You were so popular in middle school and for good reason. Everyone knew you'd be a hero one day. I was actually pretty surprised you wanted to be friends when we got to UA because you're so sweet and cool. Although I guess I should have known you'd be super nice. He trailed off at the end and gave her a subdued smile. Aw Kiri. I know we were in the same circle in middle school, but I was glad to have someone I knew going into the same class as me. She quickly wrapped her arms around his shoulders and squeezed before turning to Izuku. Said boy's stomach dropped as she stared at him for an uncomfortably long minute before beginning to reveal her first impression. Well I'm gonna be real, Midoriya. He blanched at her words. Everyone else here has been pretty spot on with their first impressions, but the first time I noticed you was in Aizawa's test. When you used your quirk for the first time, I was like, W, and I thought you'd be pretty stuck up since you got in on recommendation and all, she revealed in an inquisitive tone. A grin spread across her face as she met his eyes, but you aren't like that at all. You're a total cinnamon roll. Everyone could tell just from how you interacted with Bakugu and the other people in class. Izuku's eyebrows shot up at what she said. Cinnamon roll again? Thanks, Ashimina, he corrected himself. He quickly turned to Katsuki beside him and paled as the other boys stared blankly at him. Kaken, I don't really know what to say about you, he trailed off, unsure what exactly was okay to say in that situation. No, be honest, Katsuki replied, none of the usual venom in his voice. I want to know. Okay? Izuku glanced at the ceiling before quietly beginning. Well, when we were kids before we got our quirks, I thought you were awesome because you were so confident. And then when you got your quirk, I thought you were even better. His gaze dropped to his lap as he fiddled with his fingers, contemplating the best way to word the next statement. I think when mine came in late, I thought you were upset, but you weren't as bad as everyone else, so I still looked up to you. He paused and glanced around the table at everyone's confused looks. Oh, that probably makes no sense without context. Sorry. Hey, shut it. They don't need to know, Katsuki muttered. I don't care what they know, but you don't have to tell them shit. Alright, well, he felt bad for being so vague, so he blurted as quickly as possible. My quirk came in that some kids weren't so nice about, but when it did manifest, Kaken sorta stood up for me, so it's all good. Huh. DMN. Okay. Lit. Anyways, Kaken, what did you, think of Zero? Izuku asked, moving the topic along. Considering I just met him today, I assumed he was kinda bland and I didn't really give a shit what he was like, Katsuki growled, slumping even lower into his seat. Hey man, I'm not bland. Shut it, tape dispenser. Okay. Well, Jair, you're our last question, so what'll it be? Mina exclaimed, clearly uncomfortable with the tension that had popped up after Izuku's answer. Huh. What's everyone's favorite animal? One-word responses since lunch is practically over. Mine's cats. Oh, one word, Sparky. Bakugu yelled. D-dogs. Sharks. Frogs. Sea cats. Murder hornets. Spiders. The bell screeched through the lunchroom as Zero delivered his answer, causing Izuku to jump possibly higher than earlier. Everyone picked up their trays, a comfortable silence coming over them as they made their way back to class. The next day of school was eagerly anticipated by Class 1A. As the day began, most of the students were practically vibrating in their seats with anticipation. Being the final day before the sports festival, they would finally be getting details about the long-awaited event. Most of the class already knew that the Gen Ed, Support Corps, and business students would be allowed to participate, but today felt like it would finally come together. Focusing on trivial things like English, math, and hero law was pretty much impossible as energy and anxiety radiated off of every person in their classroom. Lunch finally came after what seemed like an eternity, and the class was finally able to explode with one another about all their thoughts and worries about the next day. Clambering past the chatting students, Izuku yanked the door of their classroom open, revealing a sea of students from all different classes and grades. Word spread like wildfire about the UA incident, and it seemed the other students of UA finally had something to say about it. A blonde boy that Izuku didn't know but recognized from the hero course stood front and center like he had been about to barge into the room himself had someone not let him in. Well, what do we have here? Class 1A finally makes an appearance. He drawled out his words, contempt dripping off every syllable. Izuku cowered away from the boy, glancing over his shoulder at his classmates who had stopped talking and were now focused on the interaction in the doorway. What? Don't have anything to say for yourself? I thought someone in your class would be a little more heroic. Izuku's anxiety spiked as the tone in the blonde's voice became all too familiar. Your class has been all over the news. People are saying viewership for the first year's festival will be at an all-time high just to watch you 20 heroes in training. His face darkened. But he trailed off, looking behind him where the rest of the students of the hero course had pushed their way to the front of the crowd. They should be watching us. Izuku in a breath, readying himself to respond. You consider this a declaration of war, 1A? Class 1B won't be holding back. Soon the media will realize where their attention should be, and I'll be leading them. A shadow fell over Izuku as someone came up behind him. Who are you? The blonde spluttered as his face warped into a scandalized expression. I'm Minoma. Oh, I didn't even know you were in the hero course. the boy behind Izuku growled out. Why don't you pick on someone your own size instead of giving your declaration to someone who's just trying to go to lunch? Izuku craned his neck to get a look at who was behind him, despite already knowing who it was. Katsuki's hand came down heavy on Izuku's shoulder, snapping his attention back to Momo. Oh, and you think you could take me? You have no idea who you're messing with, Momo snarled. You're right, I don't. But I bet you know exactly who I am, don't you? Momo scoffed and turned on his heel, ready to make his getaway when a much taller boy pushed past him, knocking him to the side. You hero students are so full of yourselves. You forget that the rest of us will be joining. Just because our quirks aren't as flashy as yours and we didn't get into the hero track on our first try, doesn't mean we won't snatch your spots right out from under you the second you slip up. The sports festival gives students like me the opportunity to really showcase our abilities and prove that the hero course is where we belong. He looked past Katsuki and Izuku at the rest of 1A who had slowly crowded around the doorway to listen. Consider this my declaration of war. I will take your spot if you can't prove you deserve to be in this course. Shinso Hitoshi will be the name on everyone's lips after this festival, not yours. He slunk back into the crowd, leaving the rest of them stunned and at a loss for words. Momo had disappeared and it seemed the rest of the students outside of 1A's room had similar plans. They slowly dispersed as 1A watched in silence. Is that true? Izuku asked quietly, looking to the only one who hadn't joined them at the doorway. Aizawa sighed and ran a hand down his face as he leaned on his podium. This happens every year, he groaned. 1B and the Gen Ed students always make their statements. This year was just worse because of all the media attention you've been getting. Students can move up from Gen Ed or 1B into your class. It's not common, but for some with quirks like mine that only work on people, the entrance exam doesn't give them much opportunity to actually make it into the hero courses. The sports festival is their chance to actually prove that administration should give them a chance. Usually though, it's a much longer process and most students won't transfer until second year. He surveyed his class for a moment before continuing. However, I would take them seriously. I was on the team who gave you points in the entrance exam, and I remember Momo and Shinso. I'm not revealing anything, but they aren't playing around. The media has put you in the spotlight, and they want a taste of it. A few students essayed in a breath as they took in his words. Perfect, Katsuki growled, a manic grin splitting his face. It's no fun without a little healthy competition. Izuku's hands trembled as he set his lunch down at a table as far as possible from Class 1B. Katsuki had lost him in the hallways, so he was all alone as he began to eat his lunch. That was of course until a tray dropped loudly in front of him. Midoriya! Uraraka's bubbly voice exclaimed. She plopped down into the seat across from him as another tray was placed gently to the right of hers. Do you mind if we eat with you, Karo? Tsu croaked out. And not at all, Izuku exclaimed, hands waving frantically. Ida usually eats with us too. And Yamamoto. But they stayed back to talk to Aizawa about the incident today. They'll be here any minute, Uraraka announced as she pushed the food around on her plate aimlessly. Oh, that sounds nice, Izuku mumbled. Kaken sits with me, but I don't know where he went, so I just found a table far away from 1B. Yeah, they're intimidating, Tsu replied. I have no idea what made that kid think confronting us was a good idea. It's not like we asked for all this publicity. Uraraka pouted. I agree. Being attacked was horrible. I don't know why he made it seem like we enjoyed it, Tsu agreed. I sorta understand where he was coming from, I guess, Izuku commented. He stuck a bite of noodles into his mouth quickly. Huh. He was totally out of line. Yeah, Karo. Izuku scrambled to swallow before adding, well, yes. But his class has been working just as hard, and they probably already felt less than because we're Class A and they're B. Now that we've proven ourselves by facing real villains, they're probably itching to do the same, to prove they're just as worthy of being in the hero course. He fiddled with his fingers as he talked, refusing to make eye contact with the girls. Momo probably just wanted to be recognized. Wow, I never thought of it like that, Uraraka sighed. You're really amazing, Midoriya. A blush crept over her cheeks and up her neck as she spoke. Now I feel like a JRK for being so upset with them. Oh, he was totally being rude, Izuku deadpanned. I was terrified. I wish Kaken had gotten to the door before me. Tsu giggled and Uraraka nodded in understanding. Sorry for our tardiness, Ida shouted, interrupting the relaxed mood that had fallen over the table. He set a tray of food down beside Izuku. We were discussing how to approach Class 1B after the confrontation. My apologies, Yaoyorozu added quietly. She sat her tray beside Uraraka and took her seat. Oh, you two are fine. We were just talking about it with Midoriya. He's so insightful. Uraraka waved a hand dismissing their concerns. What did Aizawa say, Karo? Nothing more than he already told everyone, unfortunately. He was dismal at providing his students with advice, Ida grumbled. He seemed to zero in on his meal and began eating quickly. Ah, that esigs, Uraraka piped up. But the past is the past. She turned to Izuku, eyes gleaming. We came to sit with you for a reason. Izuku spluttered and shrank back in his seat. A reason? Of course, she exclaimed, fist coming to rest in her open palm. We wanted to get to know you better. We can talk about quirks, Izuku peeked up at that, or play icebreakers, or whatever you want. We just wanted you to be our friend so, she trailed off, a grin breaking over her face. Izuku's eyes widened comically as she talked. Tears almost glistened at her proposition and he nodded vigorously. Great, Karo. Sei bubbled. Kaken, Mina, Kaminari, Jairu, Kirishima, Siro, and I all did something similar to this actually, Izuku mumbled, grabbing the table's attention. We went in a circle asking questions and then everyone took turns answering. That way everyone got a chance to answer. Momo clapped her hands together in delight. That sounds perfect. Who would like to begin? Ida's hand shot into the air. I will begin. I already have a question prepared. He cleared his throat before eyeing the table and asking, what kind of hero is everyone aspiring to be? Izuku lit up at the question, excited to hear everyone's answers. We can go clockwise around the table and I can begin, he took a breath. As you may know, my brother is the pro-hero ingenium. I strive to follow in his footsteps and be a good hero in all facets. Resuing, combat, surveillance, and anything else that could be asked of me. He finished with a flourish. Wow, Karo. That's an amazing goal, Ida, Tsu commented. She adjusted herself in her seat before answering for herself. I just want to work as a rescue hero in a water setting. My quirk is best suited for that, but I want to be ready for anything too. Ida extended a hand to her. That is a commendable goal. I wish you good luck. Izuku's hands buzzed in his lap as he thought of the applications of everyone's quirks. Uraraka? Tsu prompted. Well, it doesn't sound as heroic as either of your answers, she mumbled. A blush was overtaking her face and she twirled her hair around a finger nervously. I want to be a hero who makes a lot of money. She scrunched her eyes shut as if expecting a chorus of insults at her statement. There was a beat of silence before Ida unsurprisingly broke it. Uraraka, that is a fantastic goal. To accumulate wealth is a perfectly heroic goal. Think of all the good you could do with it. Izuku's expression morphed into one of confusion as he asked quietly, is there a particular reason you want to make money as a hero? Most kids who go to UA just want to save people or be famous, but you have a serious and specific goal. Uraraka's blush grew even redder as she replied. Well, you see, my family runs a small construction business, but because it's family-owned it's hard to take on major projects and make a lot of money. She fiddled with her fork. We've been pretty poor for most of my life, so I want to be rich so I can support my parents' business. Interesting, Izuku muttered, a hand resting on his chin. Your familiarity with construction could actually make you a very conscientious hero who does very little property damage, something that makes a flashy hero do very well in polls. If you were able to use your quirk as a rescue hero while doing next to no damage to your surroundings, you would undoubtedly do very well. Not to mention your quirk will appeal to younger generations and older ones as kids will probably be in awe of your seemingly limitless powers. Izuku's head shot up. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I ramble sometimes, I didn't mean to. Completely flustered, his head came down quickly into a bow, hiding the flush of blood that had rushed to his cheeks. Thank you. I never really thought of it like that, Uraraka blubbered, a tentative grin spreading across her face. Oh, you're welcome, Izuku mumbled. Yamamo? What kind of hero do you want to be? Uraraka said a little too loudly, obviously changing the topic in her embarrassment. Oh, well, my quirk is very adaptable and it can be used in pretty much any situation. I was hoping with ample training, I would be able to be useful in any scenario. I think my goal aligns a lot with Ida's. That's so cool, Sue commented. Yes. Hopefully we'll be able to work together one day to be the most efficient and helpful to the public. Ida announced with a flare of his arm. Yamamo blushed but remained quiet, looking to Izuku for his own answer. I think my quirk would be best suited to combat actually, Izuku muttered as eyes gravitated towards him. That's so true. What we saw in the quirk assessment was so amazing, Uraraka beamed. She seemed to have recovered from her embarrassment as her eyes sparkled at Izuku's statement. Wouldn't your quirk be really helpful in rescue too? Momo asked, a hand resting on her chin in thought. Well, yes, but since it has two applications it's a lot more effective with both offense and defense at both close and long range. I wouldn't want to waste any opportunities to defeat a villain, especially with so many heroes who are more capable in rescue scenarios. Like you too. I told you to call me Tsu, Karo. Alright, Izuku stammered. Anyway, it's your turn to ask a question. Okay, Karo. Tsu paused to come up with a question before asking, I guess I'd like to know who everyone is most looking forward to training with? At that Ida's hand shot into the air. Could you be more specific? Do you mean who we'd like to partner with for combo attacks or who we'd like to spar with to get stronger? Or did you have another scenario in mind? Either or. I was thinking of partnering, but if there's someone you'd want to spar with, that's fine too. She paused before answering her own question. I think I'd like to partner with Koda Kuji. Remind me of his quirk, Yamamo prompted. He has an e-voice. He can talk to animals and command them to do whatever he wants. Since my quirk is frog, I think we could do a lot of cool combos with other amphibians and do a lot of work as rescue heroes together. That sounds awesome, Tsu. Uraraka exclaimed, hands clapping together in excitement. Thanks, Karo. Personally, I'd want to partner with you, Midoriya, Uraraka blurted. Izuku's eyebrows shot up when she looked at him. Me? Why? Yeah. Why? Tsu cooed. Well? Her cheeks flushed suddenly and she sank back in her chair. I was hoping I'd be able to use my quirk to help you, and well, she trailed off sinking further into her seat. Izuku remained perplexed but he added, well, our quirks aren't super compatible, but actually we could totally expand the range of my attacks using your anti-gravity. Additionally, my quirk works well as a support since yours is less physical. It would actually be a mutually beneficial pairing, a lot different from mine and Kaken's. That's true for most anyone though, Midoriya, Yamamo deadpanned. Yes, you're one of the most powerful and promising students in our class, Ida said. Izuku balked and just whimpered, who would you want to train with, Yamamo? I think I'd like to spar with Bakugo or Tokoyami or even you, Midoriya, she stated. Huh. Izuku sing-songed in disbelief. Well, I'm not very good at quick decision-making. It takes me a while to react, so training with those most promising and with quick reflexes in our class will hopefully hone those skills, she explained grinning. I tend to freeze up. Her smile slipped away with her final comment but was quickly plastered back on. Oh, Izuku sighed. Well, I'd love to train with someone with so much potential if you really mean it, Izuku offered. Of course, she agreed. Who would you train with? Oh, Kaken and I have promised to be each other's partners since we were kids, he said with a wave. Right, Kara? You two trained a lot before UA. Yep, he replied with a pop on the P. Without hesitating, Ida jumped in. I would like to partner with Todoroki. As we both come from families with a history of heroics, it would be beneficial for publicity, and we could share the experiences of both our fathers and siblings with each other. Todoroki has siblings? Izuku gaped. Yes, he has 3, I believe. He's the youngest like me. None of his siblings are heroes, but we saw each other at hero functions as kids, and it is my understanding that his oldest brother was being trained before him. Wow, I can't imagine having so much pressure to live up to something like that. You're awesome, Ida. Uraraka beamed. Thank you, Ida coughed out. I believe it is your turn for a question now, Uraraka. Hell yeah. Okay, what is everyone not looking forward to? The hero course is so hyped up, but personally having Mr. Aizawa for the rest of the year scares me. That's true, Karo. Oh, well, I'm actually really nervous for the sports festival tomorrow. I'm eager to show off my skills, naturally, but not being able to prepare is nerve-wracking. I suppose I'm not looking forward to situations like this, Yamamoto confessed. This could be a good opportunity to help with quick thinking though, Izuku piped up. Since you don't have time to prepare, it forces you to work on your reflexes and analytical skills. I suppose. It's still frightening though, Yamamoto muttered. Oh, for sure, Uraraka agreed. I suppose. Even though I love heroes so much, actually meeting them scares me the most. Like, I'm excited, but if they don't live up to everything I've read or seen, it'll be really disappointing, Izuku thought back to his first meeting with All Might. I have really high expectations, I guess. I don't want them to get crushed again. Tsu nodded solemnly, and Uraraka gently patted Izuku's hand where it lay on the table. Ida pet an eyebrow before asking, Again? Oh, well, I actually met All Might over the summer, and it didn't go well. He was my favorite hero for my whole life, and it was kinda the worst possible thing that could have ever happened. Do you want to talk about it? Uraraka offered. Kaken and I did a lot of that afterwards. He's really a nice and compassionate person if you can get past all the explosive walls he has put up. I dunno, I think some part of me still worries about it, but I'm mostly past it, he explained. That's good to hear, Ida assured him. Personally, I worry about how to balance the academic expectations with the heroic expectations here at UA. Getting replaced by a more promising Gen Ed student or someone from the B class is a real possibility. The table seemed to grow even more solemn at his revelation before Tsu spoke up. We all made it into this course for a reason, there's no need to spend precious time worrying if it was a good one or not. To be honest, I don't think anyone at this table has anything to worry about. I don't mean to be rude at all, but if anyone was to get removed from 1A it would be Mineta. Yamamoto glanced hurriedly at Tsu. What do you mean? Well, he did score the lowest in the Quirk assessment, and he was with Midoriya and I when the USJ was attacked. He didn't offer any strategic advice or have any particularly outstanding abilities with his Quirk. In fact, he was really a hindrance and he made some inappropriate comments too, Karo. I may be biased and I don't want to make assumptions this early on, but he seems to be an outlier. Yamamoto began to say something, but snapped her mouth shut when Ida began talking. Let's move on. I agree with your statements, Tsu, but it is too early to make any judgments. He hasn't been trained yet, so he might surprise us. He then turned to Yamamoto. What is your question for everyone? She cleared her throat and sat up sharply. I can't really think of one. Midoriya, would you like to ask a question? Oh, are you sure? Izuku asked in concern. Yes, it's okay. Alright, it might be kind of lame, but I have the same question as I asked last time I did one of these. Does anyone have a hero name picked out? I don't have anything, but I'm curious as to everyone else's answers. Oh, that's such a good question. Uraraka exclaimed. Ida stiffened and adjusted his glasses before answering. My family has held the Ingenium name for years, but because my brother is currently upholding it, I'm not sure what my hero name should be. That's okay, you don't need to know right away. I was thinking something like Froppy or Tawada. Tsu said next. Oh my god, Froppy is so cute. Uraraka squealed. I picked mine out years ago, Uravity. You know, it's a play on words with gravity. I'm not quite sure about mine either, but I'd like to use the word create since it's in the name of my quirk, Yamamoto said. Wow, you guys all have such amazing names and ideas. Izuku beamed. I'm sure whatever you come up with will be just as amazing, Midoriya, Uraraka replied. Yeah, Carol. You're already so good at planning and analyzing situations. Maybe Bakugu can help you out since he knows you so well, Sue added. Kaken isn't the best at names. He picked something ridiculous, and I'm still not sure if it was a joke or not. I believe in you, Midoriya. Maybe a nickname or something will be helpful. Did you ever have one of those? Izuku blanched at that. Kids used to call me Deku in elementary school before Kaken and I became friends, he confessed sheepishly. Doesn't that mean useless? Ida asked. Yeah, I didn't get my quirk for a long time and even then I couldn't control it well enough to prove I had any potential, he explained. That's awful, Uraraka cried out. Give me names. I'll teach them a lesson. Haha, Kaken may have already done that several times actually. Izuku rubbed at the back of his neck before dismissing the event saying, It's all the past. It doesn't really affect me now. Well, why don't we give you a nickname then, Karo? Sue suggested. Wch, you guys don't have to do that at all. Izuku stammered quickly. No, it's not a big deal, Midoriya, she replied. Just write out your full name and I'll come up with something, Karo. Izuku flushed a deep red before scribbling out, Izuku Midoriya, on a napkin and sliding it over to her. Oh, you already have a cute name. Uraraka murmured after reading over Tsu's shoulder. It has a lot of eyes, maybe we could use that. Uraraka and I are on it. Ida and Yamamoe will help too. Especially Yamamoe since her nickname is so cute too, Tsu decided. Izuku just flushed a deeper red and nodded hurriedly. Nerves bubbled up in his throat and made him jump as the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. He shot up from his seat with a quick wave goodbye and a muttered thanks before running to a head of spiky blonde hair that was making its way to class. Kaken, our classmates are killing me, he hissed from behind his friend. Katsuki whipped around in surprise. He steeled his shocked expression before facing front again and growling out, Good. Serves you right for ditching me at lunch today. I didn't do that on purpose. Besides, I saw you sitting with Kirishima and Kaminari's group as you left anyway. TCH whatever. What did they do? He asked. They're making me a nickname, Izuku breathed out. The F-dash? Don't they hear me call you a shitty nerd all the time? That's your nickname. Kaken, said explosive teen sighed aggressively before replying, maybe it'll be a better one this time, and entering their classroom.